My first meeting here. Welcome to the Hastings-on-Hudson March 19th, 2018 Board of Education meeting. We've got a packed agenda. We've got a great presentation we're looking forward to from the Courageous Conversations team. I'm going to pass the meeting over to Dr. Sinanis to give us some announcements.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Doug. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight for our board meeting. So quickly going to take us through some announcements so we can turn it over to our team from FMS and students from HHS who have been involved in this process, which is pretty exciting, talking to us and sharing with us the experiences this year around the Courageous Conversations classes that are being offered at the middle school. So thank you all for being here tonight. So I'm going to work quickly so we can turn it over to you all. And everyone who's in the audience and to our board, just so you know, when the time comes for our team to present, we're going to kind of vacate this area, let them come up here so they can take over the laptop and go from there. So we do have some quick announcements. One that is actually important and contingent upon something that we should be aware of. You see there, March 23rd is listed as a late start. If we have a snow day on Wednesday, which is looking like a more and more real possibility based on the latest track of the storm, I can't even make it up that I'm suddenly a weatherman. Anyway, but based on the latest track of the storm, we are not going to have a late start on Friday. We're going to have a regular start on Friday. That was a conversation that unfolded today during the day with a couple of building leaders, and just the idea came up of if we can't lose another couple of hours with our kids if we're losing a whole day. So I'm just letting you all know, as our community who is here, if we are closed on Wednesday because of snow, which, like I said, is looking more and more real, that communication will also state that Friday is going to be a regular day, not a late start. So just be aware of that, okay? Our high school music department is on their trip, was going to be on their trip to Boston starting on Friday, so I know that they're excited about that. I've heard a bit about that. I think, Simi, you're going on that trip, right? Yeah, so going to Elliot? Okay, so maybe you could talk to us after the trip. Let us know how it went. We have a facilities committee meeting next Monday night. It's related to the bond. I think, though, the start time is 5:30, not 6, or am I wrong? Was that the different one? 6:30? 6:30.
Yes, it's 6:30.
6:30. The finance one is 5:30. Okay, forget that. So yeah, 6:30. March 29th, we also have our annual community quiz bowl, which is exciting. Our schools are closed starting next Friday, March 30th, through Sunday, April 8th, and schools reopen on Monday, April 9th. So please be aware of that. And that night, we have a finance committee meeting at 5:30. So that's where I messed that up. Also on April 17th is our HHS PTSA meeting at 6:30 and our Board of Ed meeting at 7:30. That Board of Ed meeting is a Tuesday night, not a Monday night like our typical meetings, and that's due to when the budget vote has to happen and when we have to schedule meetings. That is the night that the board will be adopting the budget formally, and that will be what will be shared out with the community that they will be asked to vote on. So stuff to be aware of. All right, quickly, I'm going to take you through some of our highlights from the last few weeks, and then, Elliot, if there's anything you want to share after I'm done sharing this, please feel free to jump in, and then we will turn it over to our team from the middle school and hear about the Courageous Conversations experience. So first off, congratulations to Alex, who is officially signed his D1 soccer commitment, which I understand is a very big deal. He's going to be playing at SUNY Albany, the commitment, and the coach was there, Fred Sanhop, and Jesse Merchant was there, and his mom, Joy, I think that's how you pronounce her name, were on hand for the signing. It was a pretty amazing moment, not only for him, for our whole school community. And if you don't know Alex, he's like such a great kid and clearly a talented athlete as well. So we're incredibly proud of him. And congrats to his whole team, right? The coaches, the director, his mom, everyone. So congratulations to Alex. Also, we have Sasha, who is competing in the state level of the National Geography B, and that what geography? Yeah, it's pretty intense. I was here for the local geography B, and I can assure you I would have been eliminated probably in the first round. I was convinced at one point that they were talking about another planet. I was like, that is not here, but okay. But Sasha knew his stuff, and he is going to be participating. April 6th, though, happens to be during our break, so we wanted to make sure we spotlighted that. He is an 8th grader and will be representing us, so that's pretty exciting. For all of us who were there or might have heard, we did, many of our students engage in the National Walkout Day on March 14th. That was last Wednesday. It was a really impressive thing to watch, just as it related to our kids really taking a stand together, working with our building leaders and teachers to really think about how they wanted to speak up and speak out, and it was just beautifully done, and it was different. You know, the middle school had a silent walkout, silent protest. The high school had a group of kids engage in a silent protest, and then other students who were sharing their thoughts related to gun violence and changes in gun laws. It was a really powerful morning, and so I commend our building leaders and our staffs for working with the students, but our kids especially for just putting themselves out there in a way that is, I think, going to change things moving forward. I think it changes the landscape of our community, of our country. I'm really, really impressed by their work. So thank you to everyone, and to our parents for supporting that as well. Finally, we had the 5th grade musical last weekend, Mary Poppins. It's crazy to think that they're 5th graders. The show was, could have been on Broadway. It was Mary Poppins Jr. Anyone who was there can attest to the fact that it was really a very well done show. The music was great. The kids were amazing. Our directors, technical directors, everyone just did a phenomenal job. So congratulations to them. And our next board meeting is on April 17th, which again is a Tuesday night, not a Monday night, and it's a week and a half after we get back from our whatever spring break time. So that's my update. Elliot, do you have any information you want to share or anything?
Nothing in particular. I think for the high school, the biggest thing was definitely the walkout, which was like a huge, I felt like it was like a school transcending event in a way. It was like everyone really got together. It was, and the administration, I think some people were against the administration's support in some way, but I thought it was really cool how the entire school was kind of together on that.
Thank you for sharing that perspective, Elliot, and it definitely, it just speaks to the type of community that exists here in terms of working that out together and really engaging in powerful ways. So thank you. So we're going to turn it over to our team from middle school, which features not only our building leaders and Ms. Kipper and Mr. Keogh, but we have Mr. Abrams and Mr. Lito, and then we have students as well who participated.
Before we do that.
Yes, sorry. Before we do
just
that.
a couple quick things. First of all, did you want to share anything on the security?
I did want to share something on security updates. I apologize for that, everyone. I skipped one thing. It's very important. Thank you very much.
And public comment.
Yes, and we will have that in there. Thank you for...
We can take these out.
Yeah, but just in case there's some people here who want to share
Clearly.
before the presentation.
I'm excited to get to the presentation, so we're willing to let it go. Okay, thank you for keeping me in check here, keeping me honest. If you did not see, you will know that there was a community email that was sent out, an update from me today as it relates to just general update. It was exciting to write an update that wasn't about coyotes or storms, but it had information about security and safety, and that was at the forefront of the communication. So some of that stuff is spotlighted in there, but just to quickly let you know what we're doing, a security audit has been completed by our security consultant. He is putting together a report. He's already reached out to the building leaders to schedule time to meet with them and go over that, and he has shared with us that he's more than happy to meet with the board or share with the board in some way, shape, or form that audit, so that is to come. We have hired an additional security guard in this complex, but also goes up to Hillside. The person is more sweeping the building, walking throughout the building, checking doors, and then covering the lunch breaks for when our security guards do have lunch, which is a thing in each building. We increased the hours of our security guards at the high school to make sure that they are here earlier to monitor the building. We are asking that all visitors provide ID for when they enter the building. So that that was in the communication, put it into effect immediately. It kind of has been in effect in little pockets, but it will go fully into effect after you read this update. We have ordered software that will be used to scan IDs when parents and visitors enter the building. So that's not in place yet. So for right now, we're asking for IDs so people can sign in, but there will be software that you scan the IDs and they run a quick background check, security check of people entering the building. Many schools are using it. I don't remember what the software is called because there were different ones that we...
Yeah.
It wasn't Lobby Guard.
They're going with another that's integrated.
Yeah. We also, security guards will get like a list of visitors, anticipated visitors for the day, so they know who to look for when they're checking people in. There are different training sessions that we have looked at, some related to trauma, some related to emergency response, that different staff members are going to be participating in. We talked at length about the importance of unannounced drills so that we can be unprepared, prepared. And you know, the leaders will know when those unannounced drills are happening, but so we can see how our teachers and how our students respond, and it might be at recess. It might be, you know, during a transition period. Typically not when we do the drills, but an important place to do the drills to see where there are any issues in the protocols. So we're going to be doing those. Obviously, they're unannounced. This doesn't technically make them announced because you don't know when they're happening, but just so you understand, if your child comes home and said, "Oh, we had a lockdown, I didn't know it was happening." Yeah, that's because they're practicing without you knowing it's happening. How do you respond? What do we do? So that's important as well. And at this point, our entire staff has been trained at the security app/site. It is a web-based app, web-based resource for that we use to communicate internally when there's an emergency. It's called the TAP app. It is both web-based and app-based. And at this point, I believe it's already been pushed out to desktops. So for people that don't have it on their phone, you would be able to access it from your computer in the classroom or wherever you'll see it as an icon, right, as on your desktop. So those are some of the security updates. We are, as the board knows, engaging in conversations around some funds that we have in our reserve that we are looking at using this year. Some of them might include upgrades to our security cameras, upgrades to doors and windows and things of that nature. So we are looking at those as well moving forward. That's the security update.
Thanks, Tony.
Sorry about skipping that. And
I had one announcement I want to make. There are 3 Board of Education seats that are up for election in May 17th, I think it is, the voting day, May 17th. May 15th?
May 15th.
May 15th. Yes. And the process, if anyone is interested in running, is you need 25 petition signatures to run, and you need to get those into Janine Janauer here in the high school by April 16th. And if anyone has questions, has a desire to run, has an interest in possibly running, has ever thought about running, wants more information, please feel free to reach out to Janine or anyone on the board to find out more. With that, because there's a lot of energy for the Courageous Conversations presentation, why don't we do that next, and then we'll come back to public comment.
That's great.
Okay?
Yes, good.
So with that, I'll introduce Gail and Chris to come up and kick us off. How many people are coming up there?
At least 6 seats.
6?
We need 6. Yeah. We have 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we have 6. So here, no more. So we have 6. I just wanted to start.
Eileen, you can come back. They're all sitting over there.
The arrows should click you where you need to click. After you. There's one more, their chairs right behind you. Someone wants to sit here.
Slide down.
And then we'll have the kids come.
Okay. I was going to say, random musical chairs one more time.
Okay.
There we go.
Not good.
We tried so hard.
Do you want me to move that over? This mic? Do you need this one?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I know that we're all really excited to provide an inside view of our Courageous Conversation classes. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Ms. Sonia Cherry-Paul and Ms. Erica Finnegan, who are unable to attend tonight, but who were the teachers in partnership with Ms. Mateo Toledo, who developed the curriculum for these courses. And of course, a strong acknowledgement to all of the members of the Race Matters Committee. It was this committee and these teachers who have made these course offerings for all of our students possible. I'm pleased that this presentation also allows me to introduce Ross Abrams and Dr. Dietra Price-Dennis. Ross, of course, you know from the high school. He's helped connect the work of his Facing History class with the Courageous Conversation class. And we're so grateful to Dr. Price-Dennis, who has partnered with us to enhance our efforts to deliver the best possible curriculum. Special thanks to our superintendent, wherever you are, and to our Board of Education for supporting this initiative.
So at FMS, we recognize the importance of this work. And as Ms. Kipper mentioned, the Race Matters Committee has been a real driving force in the conversations and focus around what we've been doing. The Race Matters Committee and us, the administration, really agree that you can't shy away from these conversations, that avoiding difficult topics does not lead to progress. We need to be courageous and avoid colorblindness that prevents us from being color brave. The goal of these courses was to develop a platform and a place and a toolbox that we can use when having these conversations. The skills which we saw demonstrated with such grace and determination these past few weeks when students developed their own walkout could be attributed to the types of leadership and conversations they've been having in these classes. We are delighted to provide a glimpse into the serious work that's happening in these classrooms. Behind me is a student reflection which speaks to the reasons that we have this course. The excitement to engage in conversations that they see as important, but also the trepidation in entering these conversations without the needed skills and appropriate environment of safety that allows them to engage in really important, meaningful conversations. So again, we're very excited for you to be able to see what we're doing.
So in terms of our course objectives, we center discussions on the idea of race and racism, and we use different materials such as digital text. We may use picture books, we may use essays, so that we can spark conversations about race and racism. We focus on the idea of internalized racism, interpersonal racism, and institutional racism. And we also help the children kind of have these conversations, teaching them strategies and skills that they can use so that when they say something, they understand exactly what they're talking about, providing them with definitions of these words. But before we get to that, I want to take a little bit of a step back because everything that we do is based on research. So I'm working on my doctoral studies at Columbia, and I met Dr. Price-Dennis at Columbia, and I took her course, and we talked a lot about critical literacy skills. So I just want to take a step back so that you understand that everything that we do is based on research.
Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to say thank you so much to the team here for opening up their classroom and opening up your community to have me come in and learn with you and with your students. And that the work that's happening is truly groundbreaking. And in my mind, based on what I know, it's really the next wave in multicultural education for the 21st century. And so this kind of graphic behind us just points out 4 different domains that the work sort of draws from. So from the early work in multicultural education that kind of grew out of the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, to culturally responsive education, which was an offshoot of that work, to critical literacy, and now racial literacy. And I think the work that the teachers have been developing from, I think I've probably been able to come to the classroom 8 times maybe, to sort of hang out with the kids and really be a part of the work that's happening on the ground as it's developing, sits at the sort of nexus of racial literacy for 21st century learners. And that's really exciting, and it's not happening anywhere else in the country. There's a lot of work that's been going on over the past couple of decades that really highlights what we need to do to prepare teachers to do this work, what we need to do to prepare pre-service teachers to do this work, what we need to do to prepare administrators, but not a lot of work focusing on what we should do to prepare students to engage in this work. And so I think it's exciting. It's an exciting time for your district, and it's really forward-thinking. So if there are other questions, I can go into all of the notes that are down there, but I think that's the highlight.
We're just kind of briefly just underscore the goals, some that we've already spoken about, but We want kids to understand that race is a uniquely American story and that it really shows up in many different parts of our lives. And to understand that race is going to live in our psychology, it's going to live in the relationships we have with other people, and it's going to live in our institutions. And being able to parse out those differences is actually really important for them to understand where they fit. And this is, I think, a huge one. We call these blind spots. We do a lot of work in the class in getting to see that oftentimes it's the things that we're unaware of that most powerfully impact us in our daily lives. So this is, I think, a lot of times we have those moments in the class where kids go, oh, wait a second, I never thought about that. We're going to talk about that with our high school students in a minute, about what that looks like. And we're also teaching them key racial literacy vocabulary. Each student in the course has with them at all times a sort of their own little definition sheet that they keep with them. And as we come up with new terms and we discuss new things in the class, they're keeping a good kind of vocabulary list for themselves. And oftentimes that list includes words and terms that we hadn't planned on talking about, but that come up in the course of our discussions. We're also going to teach them how to do this. I think that's, the hard thing is, how do you have a conversation about this? How do you say to your friend, I don't know if I love that joke? Or what you said the other day, I'm still thinking about it, and I want to talk more about it. So yeah, learning how to do that without it being accusatory, without it being something that causes undue strife is a big part of the class. We want them to learn how to challenge topics, to, when something doesn't sit right with them, to raise the question. And the last thing is we want them to learn strategies to recognize when they're being given a stereotype, and to develop those kind of counter narratives that really powerfully undercut those canned narratives that we see so often on television or in commercials or on toy packages, so they're capable of being able to construct their own stories that go against those. In terms of the course, one of the things that when this course was developed, and I've got to see it sort of from the outside because I had to come in halfway through, was there's a lot here. And when the course was designed, it was designed to be taught in 6th and 7th and 8th grade, the same course this first year. And what I think all the teachers have recognized is that there's so much room here to grow each of these topics into much larger things. And so as we're looking towards the next year and how to develop this program, the question is, what does 6th grade look like? What does 7th grade look like? What does 8th grade look like? Because we found that there's, we could add on 10 more things to this list that we didn't cover. So it's really exciting actually to see this course as it's starting off, to see all the room there is for growth and for different areas to explore. And, oh, sorry.
So we're just going to go show you kind of what a lesson is like. So I actually taught this lesson this morning, and it went really, really well. And I'll share a little bit about it. So some of the objectives of the course is to examine the concept of what is a stereotype and to understand why stereotypes exist. And we'll talk a little bit about the idea of the concept of visibility and what that means and what is it that that it represents for them in terms of visibility. So each one of you has received a packet, and you have something kind of that looks like a T-chart. So on the right side of the chart, I asked the students to list some words, ideas, phrases that come to mind when you think of the words Native American, Indigenous peoples, First Nations, or India. Just whatever comes to your mind. Just list whatever comes to your mind. I'll give you 30 seconds.
There will be a quiz on this.
This is a real activity.
Oh, sorry. I like my pen over there.
So just one.
Audience is included.
They have. Yeah, kids. Write that down. Your sister, actually. Your sister, all of my
Right side or the left side?
The left side.
Left side.
Sorry.
he asked.
The right side. It was the right side.
Whatever side he said is the right side.
So these are what they actually said.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
My stereotype or the stereotype that I believe exists
Whatever,
in society?
no, whatever word comes to your mind when you hear the words Native American, Indigenous Peoples, First Nations, Indian.
Thank you.
So does anybody want to share out?
I think people need
Another minute?
It's still right.
Seconds?
Yeah, you gotta count down.
That's teacher time, so that could be
Teacher
5
time.
seconds.
The lights.
Pencils down.
So what were some ideas or some thoughts?
I'll start. Struggling communities.
Varied cultures.
Original Americans.
Misrepresented.
Nature.
Interesting.
So-
It's very
so-
interesting.
So I'll share with you what our children came up with. So they talked about feathers and corn and longhouses. And the Washington Redskins came up. Thanksgiving, the Trail of Tears, bows and arrows, teepees, nature, savages. So these were kind of the words that children came up with today when we did this activity. So then I said to them, okay, so we're going to, now that we've thought about this, we're going to watch a video, digital text. So if you can watch this digital text, and then we'll talk about it after.
This assumes I can turn it on.
Is there supposed to be sound?
Yes.
Yes, hold on. So, all right, let's see. There is supposed to be sound. So let's see. Do we have any sound? Okay, no sound yet. Okay, we're going to work on the sound. Oh, well. Just plug.
Chris is like, we can fix that.
So it's good. We're going
Signed.
I think
this is that one, because there's sound.
Okay.
Like that here.
Now it's on. Very lucky.
Proud, forgotten, Indian, Navajo, Blackfoot, Inuit, and Sioux. Survivor, spiritualist, patriot. Sitting Bull, Hiawatha, and Jim Thorpe. Mother, father, son, daughter, chief. Apache, Pueblo, Choctaw, Chippewa, and Crow. Underserved, struggling, resilient. Squanto, Red Cloud, Tecumseh, and Crazy Horse. Rancher, teacher, doctor, soldier. Seminole, Seneca, Mohawk, and Creek. Mills, Will Rogers, Geronimo. Unyielding, strong, indomitable. Native Americans call themselves many things. The one thing they don't.
So the children were pretty quiet after, and then I asked them, and I'll ask you, to, on the other side of your T-chart, think of words that come to mind when you think of Native American, Indigenous peoples, First Nations, or Indian.
After seeing this now.
After seeing this now, on the other side of your chart. So what are some of the terms that came up for you this time?
So they're very oppressed, persecuted.
Resilient, marginalized, community.
Individuals. What did you say?
Individuals.
Threat of the nation.
Our children came up with misunderstood, resilient, doctor, traditions, feathers, and they actually saw another video as well, but for time, and that the feathers are hard-earned. Of course, Washington Redskins and how it's offensive and racist. Teacher, culture, and family. So we went from only seeing Native Americans in the past to actually acknowledging, oh my gosh, they are still here with us today. And that was very eye-opening for a lot of our children. Then we talked a little bit about the term, what is a stereotype? And we provided a definition, and we talked about what exactly that means. And the children were very clear and completely understood what a stereotype is. And then we talked about some questions. And we talked about, let's look at those T-charts. What are some of these stereotypes on your T-chart? And of course, they brought up the idea of feathers and corn. And we had great conversations about why is it that they came up with those ideas. Then we talked about how do stereotypes connect to what we've just done. And they talked a lot about the idea that they don't really see Native Americans around them. They don't really know much about the culture other than what they hear in the history class. So they kind of have this one-dimensional view of Native Americans. And it was really a great conversation. And then we talked about how stereotypes exist. And through those conversations, we came up with 3 reasons for stereotypes. And the first one is the oversaturation of select images, this idea that we're always seeing Native Americans in the past. So of course, when you're asked, what do you think when you hear Native American, you immediately go to the past. Then we talked about that there's a lack of visibility. I had one student who said, you know, Ms. Toledo, I couldn't think of one thing other than what I've heard in school. And that was an interesting conversation as well. Well, why is that? Why is it that you couldn't think of anything at all? Because you don't see it. And if you don't see it, it doesn't exist. And then we talked a little bit about the idea of the lack of learning about Native Americans in school. So we had very interesting conversations, and they had great ideas. And another student said, you know, Mr. Toledo, I must have read 100 books in my lifetime. And I don't think I've read one book that had a Native American in it today. So even the fact that the children are thinking about these things, thinking about the books that they're reading, thinking about the ideas that they have, that's our goal, and that's very powerful.
And now I'm going to talk about, so I think what's so interesting is that, so the curriculum was written over the summer, right? And through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And then what's happened over the course of the year is there's all these new things that keep coming up. And I happen to be fortunate enough to teach a class in the high school called Facing Ourselves, Reading, Race, and Gender. And one of my students, Simi, is here with us today. He's an amazing student in class, and towards the middle of the semester, I just found out I was going to be teaching the 7th grade class, and I was fairly panicked. I mean, to be honest, I didn't know what was going to happen. And so I asked my students, anyone think they'd want to come down and help me run a lesson, just more out of fear than anything else? And Simi and a few other students bravely said yes. And they only said yes, they said, I think we have some ideas about what we might want to do. And so Simi said, I have an idea of a lesson I really want to talk about, something that's really important in my life. And so I'm going to let her talk about it. And then Kayla, this is how these things work, who I've never taught before, was talking to Simi and said, that's something I think about a lot too. Can I join in and participate in this as well? And so they're going to discuss a little bit about the class that they ran this last week in the 6th grade class, the 7th grade class, and the 8th grade class. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
So, as Mr. Abrams mentioned, okay. So, as Mr. Abrams mentioned, I was in his Facing Ourselves class in the high school. I've been in the Hastings district since freshman year. I don't live in Hastings, so again, I do look at Hastings in a different lens than people who do live in Hastings. Like Kayla's lived in Hastings her whole life. I live in Yonkers, and I thought it was interesting being in the class because a lot of the topics we talked about, I had no one to talk about. And it was like, except Kayla. Yeah. And even with Kayla, we still have things that we can't understand the other on. So kind of having Facing Ourselves was an experience that I wish I had in my freshman year. So when Mr. Abrams asked if anybody wanted to teach, I had talked to Kayla before I brought her in to help me teach. And me and 3 other high school students decided to talk about hair, because that is a big thing, especially for Kayla and I and other students. So we did a presentation about hair and the struggles of hair. Yeah. And I made a very bold move, which is very taboo. Like, even Kayla was like, we need to think this over and talk. We decided to bring in, because another thing is that people constantly mistake different hairstyles. So we decided to bring in wigs that had all the different hairstyles we could think of possible that we see people commonly wear. And the thing is that when the middle schoolers saw that, because it was a really normal presentation, we were joking, we were laughing, and then we started talking about hair, and then when they saw 4 different types of hairstyles, and we talked about how this one, the names that people call braids, what people call faux locks, what people call afros, and then straight hair kind of really struck a chord. And I remember one kid, he was really shocked and just had to take a breather, and he was whoa, I never thought about that. So when I decided to continue helping Mr. Abrams, I decided to make a lesson plan that I had Kayla help me with. So I'm going to have Kayla talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so we went in, aside from hair, we went into makeup, skin whitening, and even you can see right there, the Kodak, in the camera industry, and how they can't, for a while they couldn't photograph darker skins. Yeah. So we went into how skin tone is really kind of pushed aside. We prioritize on lighter skins versus darker skins, and don't focus on undertones. We showed Fenty Beauty, and how their large range of foundation, 40 shades, was able to adapt to most people, and it sold out quickly. And we were teaching these kids how most people think that if you kind of tailor to a larger audience, you won't get that many people buying it, especially for darker skins, because it's seen as taboo, when in reality they sold out so quickly. So we were getting that message out. And
we noticed, because when I first taught Mr. Abrams' class, I think it was a 7th or 8th grade. Yeah. It was a 7th grade class, and they were very open, and we noticed, because the first class we taught was 6th grade, second class was 8th grade, and the one that we talked today was 7th grade. And we noticed that the 6th graders, we made jokes with them, they understood the conversation, they were very like engaged.
Lively.
Yeah, they were very lively. Some of them were like, I don't understand how some people in the high school could say and do these things, like that's not right.
Yeah, because we shared our personal stories with her.
And we shared like instances of like bullying, teasing, like taunting, and some of the 6th graders, there was one 6th grader in particular, Graham.
Yeah, Graham.
We love Graham because he was the most understanding little kid I've met, and I haven't met many people in the high school or like in who are so young who understand like there are things that you do and don't do. And we noticed as you go up, you kind of face more like
a cold shoulder.
A cold shoulder. So the 6th graders, they were open, they were laughing, we made jokes, but they still got the message. 7th graders, they still got the message, but
it was like some slight disconnect.
Yeah, resistance. And then with the 8th graders, it was just, we tried making jokes, we tried everything, we tried playing games, and it was still like,
it was just
stone cold.
Nothing.
It was silent and kind of trying to teach, and you have these kids you're trying to really understand, and you don't want it to seem like you're lecturing them, because that doesn't always work. So even with the 7th graders, it wasn't until like midway through and close to the end that we had some reactions, some commentary, like some people started like talking and sharing experiences. And even with your teacher, Kayla's middle school teacher, who like
Miss Finnegan, I like almost brought her to tears when I started talking about how I used to straighten my hair because I hated the attention I would get from my big curly hair. And she like was so close to tears because she kind of saw that was my student and I didn't do anything about it. So it was very interesting to see her and everyone in the room just being very cold to this idea.
Yeah. And we were even talking later on, I was saying that like I'm planning to go to college far away, but I would be willing to come back and help with the middle school because
this is really important.
Yeah, it's really important. And I'm a senior, Kayla's a junior, so Kayla will be here, and I could be like, here's some lesson plans, because even with the 8th graders, I was saying that like for the 8th graders, instead of it being one day, if we broke up the 4 main topics across 4 classes, we would probably get to them. For the 7th graders, maybe 2 classes, 2 topics per class, and the 6th graders, they're just they're just a happy bunch, and they were
they were great.
They were great. They were
come back.
Yeah, like some of the 6th graders, I was like, why are you need to be in my facing ourselves class in the high school? You need to sit down on the class.
You need to meet some high schoolers and teach them this.
And we always wrapped up with what would be some advice you would give older students, because when we were talking about the 8th graders, like we've been talking about them since we taught them, kind of. We notice a pattern, kind of, because once you hit 8th grade, you start becoming who you are, you start solidifying your ideas, and it isn't until like constant pushing, like you notice, and even in the high school, like when it came to like people who would like taunt, tease people, or like make people feel very self-conscious, it wasn't until like junior year or maybe senior year they'd be like, oh, I'm sorry for what happened freshman and sophomore year, I'm sorry what happened junior year. So we noticed that like with the 8th graders we're already seeing, and then in the high school we would see it like years later, because a lot of the seniors who were in my class like were like, oh, I'm sorry for what happened freshman year, because I didn't know anyone. So it was kind of like freshman year I was like, why are people doing this, why are people saying this? So with that, I guess one main thing is that I would like to come back. Kayla has agreed to do it. Yeah. And even when we're in college, we're like, we would still come here and please let us help.
It's so important to the kids to understand this, because it shouldn't be that people who are just kind of like pushed down for their differences understand this. It should be everyone should get it. So. And
we always wrap up every lesson with, we're not trying to say that everything you've done in the past, everything you've seen in the past is horrible or makes you a bad person. We're just trying to say that you know the difference now, and we're not going to force you to do anything, but please, we know how it feels not to have anybody in our corner.
Yeah, be that person.
Please be that person who, like, if you notice somebody doesn't feel comfortable, because even one kid in class today was like, yeah, no, I'm always standing there and I feel weird because this person's asking this person this question and I don't know how to act, so I just stand there. And we were saying, like, if you notice somebody's like starting to like kind of just backed into a corner, help them out, kind of talk to them, be their friend, be their ally.
Because we would have wished
that we had that like freshman and sophomore year, and like if we hadn't become friends again, we would just still be like, we wouldn't really have that many allies, because in passing you can talk to people, but like to have somebody that's like, oh, this happened, like, did you experience it? And also she's been in the district longer, so I would ask her like, oh, is this normal? Is this what happens normally? So kind of for the middle schoolers to have that, to feel like, oh, I'm accepted, like I can accept others, and like we can all be different but still like treat each other the same, because you shouldn't really treat anybody different just because of one thing or something they can't change.
And I know Simi, do you have to run? Simi is supposed to be at course practice right now, and so kindly said to come down, so I want to make sure that she gets back up as well. Thank you so much. I just want to add in that, you know, in some ways that fits with the research and fits with why I think the class is so important, is that and my Facing Ourselves classes has a chance to do research on different topics, including sexuality. And really the time to be talking to kids about this is in the elementary and the early middle school years, to start to have these conversations, and that it's not that it's too late by the time they get to 8th or 9th grade, but a lot of the patterns have kind of been established. And I think that definitely sort of speaks to you know, what we see. For me, I'll just throw in two. I'll never forget in my 7th grade class, the first time Simi came down, and there was a kid, you know, at the end they were giving comments, and one kid raised, a very small kid raised his hand and said, you know, I think it was really courageous that you shared that with us. And that fit the title of the course. I don't think they were trying to match it, but it was a really great moment. And, you know, something that I think, as we talk about growing the course, the idea of this sort of vertical articulation of high schoolers coming into the middle schoolers talking to elementary school kids is really kind of appealing, I think, and different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at the end of each quarter, we give the students surveys. In your packet, we gave you some of the student responses. It's the green section. So in black are the questions. So some of the questions, please choose one or two of the topics of the course that you think are particularly important, and explain what you learned about these topics and why you think they are. So I'll just give you a few minutes to kind of look through them, and then we can talk about it. So it's something for us to think about. The responses are very powerful, and you can take that with you so you can really peruse it later. But I just wanted to leave us with this final reflection, because I think that this really sums up the work and the importance of this work. So the student wrote, "I feel that it is very important to discuss the large issues that plague our society. And while it might make some people uncomfortable, having an environment in which to talk about this particular issue is especially important today. If we are not taught about these issues, then it will be made worse. By ignoring this, one is allowing it to go on." So I thought that was a very powerful quote, and really the reason why, behind everything that we've done. So I think that moving forward.
So moving forward, we have a curriculum that was designed last summer, and it was designed for 6th, 7th, and 8th to be given the same content. So now we need to be thinking in terms of year 2, year 3, the 6th graders that have gone through it, what will their 7th grade experience look like? And then 7th graders who've been exposed, what will their experience look like? So obviously that's going to require some curriculum development, continued support from the Board of Education and the superintendent district. But in all my years here, this is one of the proudest initiatives, one of the initiatives of which I am most proud. It's such important work. Our children walk into these classes and they're just ripe for these conversations, especially, and I think we heard, the 6th graders. So I think that when we focus our attention on the younger children, they're wide open, they don't have the barriers, they're not as afraid, they're not as scared, they're going to say something maybe they ought not to say, or somebody may think that, "I can't believe you said that." 6th graders are a little bit more receptive to it. But the survey, and I've spent a fair amount of time in these classes throughout the course of this year, and the conversations, the discourse, we've never had conversations like this, and we don't really teach about this. It's sort of when I think about the mindfulness initiative that we have, when we say to kids, "We really need you to pay attention." Well, we don't really teach children how to focus and be mindful in the moment to be able to pay attention. We don't really talk about race, so we don't talk about all that's behind it. We leave all of that up to the media, to digital texts, to conversations maybe that parents have or don't have, and how comfortable parents may be or may not be in these conversations. But there is an ease and a comfortability in these classes. The children are, once the groundwork is laid, the children are really engaged and comfortable asking the questions. So I think that these courses are powerful, and I think they're revolutionary. I think our kids will become different citizens having been exposed to these courses, learning and getting the foundational work that we just haven't offered before in the world of education. So again, I am incredibly proud of our teachers, the Race Matters Committee, for everybody stepping in to help and provide a different lens, a different perspective. Teacher, you've been wonderful giving your time and guidance and counsel. We really appreciate that. Our high school youngsters, awesome. I was in on that lesson. I was in on the initial hair lesson. Took my breath away, and I wasn't in Miss Finnegan's class. I was in your class, and it took all my control not to well up and cry, because it was so powerful, and your experiences that you were sharing were experiences that I couldn't possibly know about, but I needed to know about. So I just thank everybody here. It's just it's pretty remarkable work. And again, thank you for being a district that supports this kind of an initiative and this kind of work. It's a pretty beautiful thing. So I hope you'll continue to support it.
And I also hope the team would consider maybe presenting this work at Columbia's Summer Institute on Reimagining Education. I think that we have teachers and administrators and people from around the country who have come the past 2 years, and they could really benefit from hearing this exact presentation. So I know Ross and I've talked about it. I'll just put some more pressure on you by saying it publicly.
It's the first I'm hearing. Well,
I'll be away.
you're kidding. Thank you for that. Any questions?
Does anyone on the board have any questions, insights?
Not a question.
Can I come
but-
back to school?
But while we're recommending presenting this someplace, another place I think would be great to present it is at the annual NYSBA conference, because this is the kind of thing that like school districts will bring teachers and students to talk about some new program, and it allows
Other
school
districts.
boards and administrators from all over the state to, learn about something that's going on somewhere, and this seems like just the kind of thing that would be great. So
We'd love it.
So
That just committed us.
There you go.
So just a couple questions. So I guess the one issue, and I mean, I think we all can probably tap back into our childhood and get the 8th grade Heisman that you get, kind of, I'm too cool, we were all sort of there in 8th grade, but does that not suggest that in this district at least, as 4th graders become 5th graders and 5th graders are in the middle school, that maybe they're the population and it's a 5th, 6th, just to touch them earlier, that's a question, and as you work on a curriculum that's gets into progressively more challenging topics versus what is a more, take the Native American example, it's a pretty unoffensive topic. I don't think anyone's going to really debate the pros and cons. The 5th graders could be actively engaged in that, and it sort of sets them up maybe for really more challenging, meaningful, hey, what are some of the issues in society that we face both broadly and locally in 7th grade, and try to inculcate this discussion early. And 8th graders are in an ideal world prepared. So that's a statement more than a question, but just something to think about among yourselves. And this is an operational question I would like to hear the answer to. So one thing that came back to me just in asking the young people that I'm in touch with, it sounds like because of its status as an AOK class, kids that are in chorus, kids that are in band, aren't in this class. And so what I was wondering is what percentage of we're pretty heavy on, in a good way, on the arts. What percentage of our kids are we missing in that regard? It's important work. Are we talking about 25%? Are we talking about 30%? And you're nodding in agreement, so it sounds like the information I'm getting is right.
I don't know the percentages. We would have to come back to you with a percentage, but you are accurate that there are some kids who, because of their schedule, can't get into this class.
Yeah,
Chris, I'm pretty accurate.
I mean, it would be students who have multiple performance arts.
Okay.
Where their days of practice would align with all the days of the course offering.
So there are some, but we'll come back to
It's just something to think about.
Well, and we were aware of that. There sort of wasn't any way around it, but I'd like to come back to your first.
Yeah, and I don't need the percentage, honestly.
No, but
but it's just something.
Yeah, your first statement, though, that in terms of 5th grade, I think if we had our druthers, Tim, we'd like to see it a backward design, so we'd like to see this go all the way down and then continue up. The initiative started in the middle school, but there is so much curriculum that could be developed for the younger children, and I believe should be developed for the younger children. And Ross is certainly doing it in the high school, but the sooner we begin to have these conversations with our young people, really young, then the easier the conversations, the more knowledgeable, and the more depth we can begin to add to the curriculum. And everybody jump in here on this if you agree or disagree.
No, absolutely. I think we can, I think to your point of this being a kind of a soft way in.
Yeah.
It's the first time children are learning about this.
Yeah.
It has to be soft.
Yeah.
We have to kind of, get them used to having the conversations first. So I agree with you. I think it has to start earlier. I think it has to continue, and I think that's the point of creating a year 2, creating a year 3, because we weren't sure, no one's done this before. It wasn't like we can call someone and say, hey, you're doing this work? So we're kind of on the cutting edge here, and we're creating this curriculum.
Yeah.
So to your point, I think that it's a great point to make, and I think that it's something that we've all talked about.
And I think the courses originally designed too, each of them had a final research component, which was different for 6th, 7th, and 8th. That was the one thing that was differentiated, and they did kind of step up in sort of the difficulty level. 7th grade was institutional racism and looking at, environmental racism, and looking at environmental racism. And it was fascinating teaching that last unit because we'd given them 3 options. We looked at post-Katrina, we looked at the Flint water crisis, and we looked at the pipeline issue. But very quickly, and then we had another category, and very quickly the kids started to get interested in some of the environmental racism that happens in New York. And we didn't really have time to do it, but you could envision in an 8th grade class what it'd be like to be writing letters to local politicians and to really going and working in that way.
If they're ready for that through 5th and 6th grade.
So I think it's good.
I want to just piggyback on what Tim said, but I just want to commend all of you and the others who aren't here for taking this on and creating. I think this is just incredible, what you've created, and I know you'll tweak it if you think it needs to be tweaked, but it is such a gift that you're giving to the children, to everybody in the district. And I think it was kind of a brilliant, starting with Native Americans was such a kind of a more manageable way into the whole idea. I think it's not the topic could be unmanageable anyway, but I think it made it's for many reasons, because it takes it out of the usual black and white, the way it always gets kind of boiled down to black and white, even though it's very much that, but also more complicated. But I think there are ways that kids can step outside of their own experience, so it allows them to be able to look at it before they can first start thinking more about their own experiences. I just think it's the content and the process is just so commendable, and really, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to say one other thing, and this is really intended for the community as opposed to you up front. Something about this program that we've been at this a year, between it being proposed and funding, et cetera, that I have never thought about prior to your presentation. And my school district, and Doug, my school district, my public school district outside of Philadelphia that I grew up in, which was an immediate suburban border town of the city. Pretty fairly different demographics than Hastings, but still certainly then in the 80s, what was deemed a very good district, and it is less good now. Not terrible, but less good now than then. It would have been a very different district to have attended were this program to have existed and been executed the right way. Because what I don't want to suggest is that its existence alone is good, but its existence and its execution, both my experience as well as experience of a solid 20% of the student body at a personal level, but then 100% of the student body at a holistic level would have been very different. And I've never thought that. I probably should have, but I can be thick. There's any number of people that will vouch for that. And this evening's presentation really hit home. So, I'm sure that there's any significant amount of work that needs to be done to continue to improve this and refine this and to differentiate it and figure out where to go. And we could discuss the, immediate relevance for Hastings or not. Like there's any number of things we could talk about, but the concept and the importance of the concept, now thinking about it in a longer 30-year lens, is really high. So you already agree, but as a board member, I'm saying it largely for the camera. And I think this idea of rolling it out, to Columbia, and I don't know what these other districts, I don't know what my own, childhood district is doing now. Hopefully they're doing something like this. But if they're not, and, we as Hastings are able to put it out there for possible consumption by others, that could be a really good thing at a very large level, at a meaningful, community level. So I just wanted to say that because the light bulb flickered. I won't say it went on, but it flickered. So thank you very much, and keep it up.
Yeah, I just want to make one final comment as well about. I want to acknowledge you, Kayla, and Simi, who's not here, but and I'm just connecting a couple different topics. Stress. I mean, we're talking about perspective taking here, and I think what we're all aware of is we don't do a good job perspective taking when we get stressed, even if we know better. I mean, I'm just listening to your stories, I thought to myself, there's probably times in my own life, maybe when I was younger, I was better at it. I mean, I have a degree in psychology and adult development. Like, I'm trained in some of this stuff, but even you get into shortcuts, you get into stress, and then you think about the kids and the stress that they're under in school. And I even see this as really a great set of skills to learn very early on, so that when you get into those stressful, tense situations, you don't fall back on bad behavior, even when you know better. Because I think there's the stories about people who, really had no idea. But I think that as we evolve and we learn more about differences and racism, that it's not just the obvious differences, it's the perspectives that, I mean, just as you shared about your hair, I've heard stories about hair. I mean, didn't Chris Rock had that documentary about hair? And I think that was the first time, but even until you said that, I didn't really think about your point of view in class, in Hastings, on a day-to-day basis. And that's, I think, what's so powerful, is that you're bringing it on a day-to-day basis to people, where I get stressed, I've got 3 little kids, and all of a sudden, I'm just taking mental shortcuts around different things. And I just think it's great that you took the time to teach, and Ross, that you acknowledged that opportunity, and who knows, they maybe did a better job than you.
I like sitting in the back of the classroom.
Anytime.
They're coming back too, they said that.
I make it a really big point to tell the kids, like, this happened here in this town. Like, don't think it's somewhere, like, really, like, different. It's here. And it seems kind of like, oh, it's whatever. Like, they're just commenting on your hair, but it means so much to me on a different level than it does to you, so. And
it's experiential. It's you. It's real. I just think it's so powerful. That's
great. I just want to add to that. I think that the more our children are engaged in these conversations, the more comfortable they'll be having them. Because unless they continue with the conversations, and they're ongoing, and they have somebody guiding them in these conversations, which is so important, which speaks to who's delivering this content, right? But if they don't have the constant conversations, then, like all of us, they go back to their default. It's sort of like the mindfulness thing. You have to practice to stay in the moment, so that you don't go back to the default, which is getting hijacked by your emotions, and then you're off and running. It's the same with this. Children need to be immersed in this, and then it needs to be sort of blended in other areas of our curriculum, so that it's just a comfortable conversation.
I think that also speaks to, the difference between the 6th grade and the 8th grade, and I wonder if in 2 years you'll see a difference in that, what the long-term effects, speaking to that, what that'll have.
I just wanted to ask a question. I was about to sort of touch upon a little bit what Gail had said. I think what you're all doing is amazing. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. It's extraordinarily valuable and definitely needed in our society today. And I'm thinking about sort of how these conversations can really continue over into other content areas. There's natural connections, as you mentioned earlier, to history. There's natural connections to ELA. There might be other connections to, economics. I mean, there's just so many other areas. So while I know that this is very much sort of in its beginning stages, and you're just working on, at the moment, I don't want to say just, but, year 2 and what that's going to look like and how that might potentially change, I think maybe taking a larger look as well into how can we sort of create these conversations sort of across the curriculum, and how, I know we're working on it as a district, but how can we make our teachers comfortable having these conversations? And while that involves professional development, it certainly also involves just having teachers who are willing to sort of take that dive, whether they're having the PD or not, because they're following the trend in terms of the interest and the need. So that's just something that I thought I'd throw out there.
And Christina, I think you touched on a really important piece, the PD. That professional development, because if people aren't comfortable with these conversations or with these concepts or ideas themselves, we have to be very cautious in not communicating that right to the children in our classes. So the more professional development we have about this, in this area, the more steeped people will be in it, and then they'll be more comfortable and be able to deliver in a way that's more genuine and sort of less forced. So we certainly have talked about that as well, and we have, I think, we had the goal of sharing, Chris and I were planning on sort of rolling this course out, Courageous Conversations, at faculty meetings. So the teachers would get a sense of exactly what's happening, but there have been so many things that have come up that we've needed faculty meetings for that it sort of got pushed aside. But so the beginning of it would be insight into what this course is really offering, just like the experience that everybody had here, right? Our teachers would have it as well.
And sort of like the value of bringing in somebody like Dr. Gray. I mean, obviously that's immeasurable, but there's also an immeasurable value for having teachers experience what kids are experiencing in your classes and in the curriculum that you've created.
And the conversations are spilling into other classes. We got an email from a parent who said, what a great example of the Courageous Conversations at work, and described a conversation that didn't happen in the Courageous Conversations class, but was happening in the language arts class, and they were using the vocabulary and the structures, and also saying things like, well, we want to make sure we're establishing a safe zone with this conversation. So it was an example of how that class had bled into other areas as well.
I was just thinking, like, how great would the, like, obviously, like, I'm not going to be in high school, and kids like in high school when, like, the kids that go through these classes are going to be in the history and English classes in high school, but how great would those, and how substantive and meaningful would those discussions be in, like, English 10 or world history if people were so informed about race.
The other component, which I think is which we all believe is an important component, is the parent component. We presented at our PTSA meeting. It was at this year's, the beginning of this year, the very beginning of this year. Yeah, and we had, I had parents emailing me asking if we could teach this course at night so that they could participate. So there's that piece, trying to figure out how to bring families into this as well.
And I appreciate that as well, because I know Dr. Sananis and I have spoken at length about the idea of how do we, take it out of just the box that it's in and kind of, spread it out so that we are talking about it in the English class, in the math class, in the social studies class. So, and I'm sure that we'll continue those conversations. So I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so
for all
much.
your effort. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that you?
That is me.
Okay. I saw that band sticker, and I was like, I saw it next to Gail once. I'm like, oh, that's Gail.
Yeah,
Thank you again to Ross and Janice and Dr. Price. Thank you very much for everything. And to Kayla and to Simi. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gail.
Okay.
It's a high tax area. Race and economic status. That somebody was thoughtfully attacking
Was she like a paid consultant or?
That's a good question. In class and range, but and doing it in a thoughtful, which is hard to do way. 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, so by the time they come to high school, there's some level of like understanding and empathy rather than literally a dual school. And that's what Cheltenham has. Cheltenham literally has a dual society, and it's become a real problem. Where some really ugly YouTube footage broke out of.
Okay. Now that the public has left, we'll have public comment. Does anybody have any public comments? Anyone? No. Okay.
So, thank you so much. Again, I was just stepping out to say thank you. Thank you to the board for making the time to have this presentation and hear about this important work. I know in conversations with others.
Ginny,
the door. Sorry. I know in conversations with other superintendents and other educators in the county, this is not work that's really happening anywhere else locally. Or beyond, and so.
Is anyone that you've spoken to trying to do it?
If there is like a course, the course that Ross mentioned, the title I always forget, Facing Ourselves. If there's like a class like that, yeah, that's really about
Senior
it.
level,
high school level, right?
Could be middles, you can incorporate, I've taken it, Facing History, Facing Ourselves.
Yeah.
So whether you're an ELA teacher or a social studies teacher, if you're secondary, you can incorporate elements of it into your curriculum.
Yeah.
So it's not that like the whole curriculum is Facing History, Facing Ourselves, but you pull out pieces when you get to certain sections in the content in which it applies.
Right.
I think, and so we may have one of the few standalone courses around the whole topic, but I can assure you that it's just not work that's being done. Just even when you approach when we were looking for PD, I was like, so has anyone used it? There was like crickets.
Yeah.
I think the thing that really stood out to me in terms of the presentation is to say that the conversation around Native Americans and thinking about my own stereotypes as I was challenged to do that, and then seeing what our kids wrote down. I was a little bit horrified, but totally not surprised when I thought about what
Makes
books.
perfect sense.
Totally. Yeah. When you think about what books that our kids have read about Thanksgiving or about Columbus or whatever, it's been whitewashed and it's been skewed. But not because teachers necessarily are doing it with intentionality. It's the way the books have been written. It's the way that textbooks have been written. It's the way that history has been.
TV, movies.
Right, everywhere. The feather, everything. It was just like, but not
They're young. They haven't really been their eyes opened up yet to like the realities of the nation and the world.
Right, and Native Americans is a really interesting place to look at it because it is a group that I think a lot of our kids don't even know that they are people that still live, like that you can go to a reservation today, or they're Native Americans amongst us. I think they see it as these people that were back in the day with the Pilgrims and have feathers in their head.
I think that's one of the challenges for our community. At the same time we were trying to do this, we lived in such
Yes. A bubble.
Majority bubble.
Yeah.
That it's hard. If you go, I just came back from Atlanta, it's a completely different place than living here.
That was kind of my point, which is in my district growing up, where you're solidly 20 to 25% African American, like this class is a very, very different class. It's potentially a much harder class to teach because there's people that are living really very different. So that's kind of the challenge, which I sort of leave in your hand day to day. But that's the challenge, is to how do you crack through the bubble and
There's
make
hope
it
in that here
relevant.
because it's very objective, like, well, you taught us about the feathers and the corn and the first Thanksgiving and everything else, but they don't actually live near a reservation.
Yeah.
So for them, it's not real, it's not about the present day, whereas in other places, it's all about the present day when you mix a lot of different groups. And, they could be on the bus and 17 different colors on the bus. But, it doesn't happen in these things that for these kids.
Right.
It's a challenge of the course.
It is, and I think actually in talking, so Simi had shared the experience with me. Simi sits on this little advisory group that I meet with regularly, and she talked about this, but she talked about it from her own lens, and she shared the story of a classmate that's relatively new, who was a child of color, and within a week, he'd come from another country, and was like, yeah, race is like a thing here. It's not a thing where I come from. Right. And I'm not going to name the country, so when I identify the child, but it was so concrete within a week. And so I bring that up because I think it's also important as this process as these learning opportunities unfold, that we do hear from our kids, especially our children of color and our families of color, to understand how some of this lands, because we have to be mindful of not making assumptions, and I don't think that's at all what's happening at all. I think what I know about the curriculum construction is that it's very much constructed upon theoretical frameworks that are vetted, that are research-based, but we have to be mindful of a constant loop kind of happening, so we are not making assumptions about the things that we think people feel or need or want to hear or who they want to hear it from. Having Simi come and talk about hair is going to be much more powerful than me standing up and giving a lesson, no matter how vetted the lesson is, and I think that's I commend them, and I commend our kids. To get up and have that conversation, and it really affected her because this was last week that we met, and she was like, it affected her how it impacted the kids, and so it's a really important thing for us to be continuing the work and then thinking about that vertical piece. How does it spread up? How does it spread down in a way that is that makes sense, that really just gives kids vocabulary, that gives kids experiences, that gives them an angle, a look at history from a different perspective than they may have looked at. And it could be something as simple as, let's think about the way we expose kids to Thanksgiving, and let's think of, or not. So,
if they're looking for some other teachers that in another place that may be doing something similar.
Fieldston.
Fieldston, because I went to the ethical culture schools, and starting in pre-kindergarten, while the course was not specifically on race, it was ethics. We started having ethics, in elementary school all the way through senior year of high school, and back then, a long time ago, we spent a lot of time talking about the Vietnam War and, the sort of political issues, but there's also a lot of issues that they discuss that have to do with race and in a school district or a school setting that is a lot of privileged children. Right. With a substantial, not necessarily minority, but
an effort towards diversity.
An effort toward diversity and also scholarship. So you've got kind of one extreme, and then you've got another extreme, and the kids trying to be.
And I think that's also a real part of this, in so much as we are a predominantly white community with much privilege, financial privilege, social privilege. It's there, and so putting that on the table when you're having these conversations is an important piece. And we should note that there's pushback on this work as well, right? There are kids who are uncomfortable with parts of the work. There are families who have expressed discomfort with some of the work, and so I thank the board for sort of doubling down and saying, yeah, let's keep doing the work, because I think that's the only way we affect change. Not just in Hastings, but beyond. And as I'm hearing them speak, we're thinking about PD and how do we have our teachers, how do we have some of our teachers facilitate PD for our own teachers, even if it's just experiencing, just that activity alone, is, at least for me, was incredibly eye-opening. How do we get our parents exposed to some of that so that they can see what the learning is like for the kids? And then how do you link in opportunities maybe for part of the learning experience to involve public speaking, so we can get our kids to understand what it is to take a position on something related to racism or bias, and it's really kind of, a lot of dots are lighting up in my head.
I will say, as a very quick aside, the Sunday on Science and Poetry piece by Josh and Ross was given to a packed house at the library.
That's great.
Packed.
That's great.
Which suggests that Courageous Conversations that's adapted for the community
People will turn
on a
out.
Sunday from 2 p.m. to 3:30.
That's great.
It will be a packed house. It will probably be a larger house than was for poetry and science. So I think if there's any question as to how to reach the community, just put it out to the community.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Great. All right. So, okay. So, budget. We'll just quickly budget. We're not going to show the slideshow because it was the same. It's the same as last week, and it was riveting last week. But for those of you who did not see it, it's somewhere on our website, I'm sure. And if not, we can give you a copy. But we did just have a finance committee update. So, Doug, if it's okay, can we just move the finance committee update up here?
Makes sense.
Okay. So we did meet right before the board meeting to talk about the moving pieces that are part of the budget development process. One of the things that we kind of brought to the top of that list of priorities, things that we're looking at, is the fact that we don't have, and thank you, Elliot, for being here. I'm sorry, I should have told you to go. Sorry, Elliot.
Big physics test
It's
tomorrow.
big physics tests. Inertia. I don't know, whatever.
Wow.
the end of your physics
That was from your superintendent.
Be clear that I did get a perfect score on my physics regents, I'm just saying. Okay, anyway, so one of the priorities that came up during, it was a long time ago, that came up, inertia. Now, that came up during our finance committee meeting, and last week during our special BOE committee meeting was a reading specialist at the secondary level. So that is something that is not in the current iteration of the budget, but after conversations at our finance committee meeting, I think we were all in agreement. So those of you who were not in the room during the conversation, I think we were in agreement that this reading specialist position for the secondary level is one that kind of comes up to the top of the list and forces us to reevaluate other positions, other components to the budget, and it's not something that we're looking at in isolation. I mean, and for the community to be clear, it's not just like, oh, this in, this out. We're looking at so many different pieces, some of it related to security updates, some of it related to transportation, there are a lot of moving pieces. But if I'm reflecting correctly what our conversation was at finance, that is very much a priority for our board and I think our leadership team as well. And it looks very likely that we will be able to find a way to integrate it into the budget, and so that it is a position that will be in place come September 1, July 1, whatever the official date would be. We are also, along those lines, and while this is more curricular than it is finance, we are engaged in conversations about how reading support services are being offered in our district from elementary, and now we would be able to extend that conversation up. So what does reading support look like, and who provides those supports, and for what reason? How does it also link the two, special ed and RTI and sort of intervention supports? And so we are excited about the prospect of having this position to work with and to collaborate with our building leaders. We did meet with them this morning to talk a little bit about what that might look like, and it's very much in the beginning stages of a conversation, but that would be something we would flesh out further at future finance committee meetings, and then when we come back here for our April 17th board meeting, it would be in that finalized budget, and we'd be able to share with the community what exactly makes that final cut, if you will, and then we would work from there. And the key being in our budget process, which we talked at length about as well, sustainability. That we can sustain things that we're adding to make sure that it's not just a temporary thing, but it is something that we can sustain long term. Not just because we believe in it, but financially that we can commit to it, and recognize that we are experiencing a growth factor this year that is somewhat of an anomaly. We do not anticipate that we're going to have that growth factor probably ever again, or at least for now until the waterfront maybe is developed, I don't know. But we want to capitalize on that in a way that also allows us to be fiscally responsible and ensure that we can have future capital projects, potential bond that we're looking at for next year as well. So a lot going on, great stuff, important stuff, and all of it really has a direct impact on learning and instruction. So I think it's pretty pretty important. And I thank you. I thank the board and the members of Finance Committee and everyone else who kind of was there as well to hear that conversation. So.
Quick question on that. Maureen, when do we need to vote as a board on that capital reserve proposition?
That would be part of the adoption of the budget.
Okay, so that would be on April 17th?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the community would have to vote on that on May 15th.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Voting what to put on the ballot.
community, just so you know, that means a capital, we're going to vote to create a capital reserve fund.
But we have one.
But we have one, sorry, to roll it
put
over.
more money
Put
into
more, there you go. So, and it's great, it's a good thing to have, and no shadiness, nothing. And the great thing about a capital fund is that anytime we use that money, it gets voted on by the public in most cases, except for some circumstances, so, yeah. So that's
Yeah,
our
and I would
fund.
just, with the capital reserve fund, it's just a good way for the public to know and understand what monies are going into the preservation and improvement of our facilities.
Yeah.
And they're not young.
Yeah. They are not young, but they're beautiful. They have character. So that's the Finance Committee update, which we can skip when we get to that section, but it also brings us up to date on the proposed budget. And to the BOE, just so you know, as the Finance Committee meetings unfold, we'll update the budget, and we'll probably share that internally initially, but we will present it formally at April 17th meeting so everyone can see that. Okay?
So, on the business items, there's 10 items. I think Janine added one late today, so there was a voter booth thing. I think everyone probably got.
We did add number 2 on the business item was new as well, because it just speaks to how we're going to be able to pay for number 3.
Okay.
But it is
I don't know
linked
when
out.
I printed mine, but I think I have.
You know about number 3, so number 2 is just related, they're
Same,
connected.
this-
Yes,
okay, got it.
it's a payment process, so,
Okay.
but it's connected.
So, I had questions, maybe I'll just ask you in private, because that was sent out as an executive, I don't know if are the numbers private, is that what it is?
Well, it's a settlement.
It's an actual settlement in
The actual
process?
settlement is
Okay,
not-
I'll talk to you about that.
And just so you know, there's nothing in the leaves. The only action that's there, because if you want to take the business, do you want to take business separate from personnel? Or do you want
Well, I guess I'll just throw a question.
Yeah,
Does
separate.
anyone have any,
Sorry.
does anyone have any questions about the business items? Clarification, questions?
The tax certain number 3 is low settlement.
It is, but it's pretty actually straightforward, because if you can tell that what happened was when the reassessment occurred, there was property that had previously not had the value, and it shouldn't have, and I think it's why, and that got picked up in the rolls, and because it's like a big company as opposed to like an individual who would have not, they have to go through this process, so they didn't actually pay the higher taxes for the year. And now.
Was that like 4 parcels rolled into one? Is
Yeah,
that
what
that
happened was, there was,
Okay.
one of the parcels was like underwater, and it really should not have that value. So
Right, right,
when they
right,
went
yeah.
to like.
So
revalue-
so not underwater financially, but literally under
There's a part of it
H2O.
underwater,
It's
yeah.
actually underwater. Wow.
Bottom line, it was just the revalue was not, they had done such a large revalue to the town that we knew that there would be some adjustments and then the tax. But even the town agreed that should have never happened, but because there was a company,
Okay.
they just paid it.
Okay.
And bought it, right? So there's really no, I don't think.
So we're voting to essentially agree with that
And then once it's
settlement.
agreed to and they agree to it at the other levels, then we'll move that to public content.
Okay, got it. We can, well, why don't we just take these, what's the term I use?
Consent.
Consent agenda?
Agenda takes everyone through.
Okay.
So before you, sorry, I just want to ask one more question on this. So there's effectively no room for negotiation.
Yeah.
What it boils down to is that this was an overpayment at this point in time
Right.
that's now going to get recouped. End of story.
On most of them, there is some negotiation, but this one was such a straightforward error
Okay.
in the reval process that there was nothing to
Water was low down there.
it.
Tide was out.
That's what they said.
Someone had their air back, the water back out. So yeah, business items.
So, yeah, is everyone okay taking that as consent agenda?
Yeah.
Okay. So do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor to approve items 1 through 10?
11.
Oh, 11, I've got
Yeah,
10.
so you have the old version.
CSE and CPSC with that?
I'll do it separately, well.
No, you just did C.
did it.
Yeah,
you just did it.
CSE and CPC.
Oh, 11,
Yeah.
that's why I said 10.
Sorry.
Okay,
You're
got
good.
it.
You're good.
So we'll do 1 through 11, including CPSC. All in favor? And I said 10, so let's get official here. Okay. Appointments.
The only thing, if you want me to just mention the retirement in personnel. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, go
So
ahead, Tony.
in the personnel section, just so everyone's aware, we did receive Elaine Avinom's letter of resignation for the purposes of retirement, effective at the end of the school year, and so that is listed there. Otherwise, and she also has to extend her current leave due to a medical leave. Otherwise, it's just a couple of appointments there. So,
Okay.
Can you, what does she teach?
Elaine, grade 7
Social
social studies, and then an AOK class as well.
She does do that.
Photoshop. Yes. So,
She's done it, I saw you on.
and the kids are really good with it, I have to say, they love it. Sorry, so you can do personnel if you'd like.
Yeah, personnel, okay. So, what we voted on which one here? Now I'm confused, because I think I have a different one than you.
Item 7, A, B, and C.
You can do item 7, right, A, B, and C.
A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Item 7, A, B, and C. Yeah, mine's
So
different.
it has a name for it.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? All right, flying here.
And then hit the front.
Okay, minutes. Does anyone have any questions about the minutes? No? 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 Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from February 26th and March 5th? Second?
Second.
All in favor? All right.
This is good, Doug. Keep it going. Motion to approve.
Okay, committee reports. We will start off with facilities.
Yes, facilities. So who wants to talk about facilities? There were several of us, some on the phone, some there in person. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
I can talk a little bit. I didn't bring my
no worries.
agenda, but we had the architecture firm back to go through with us, again, the list of possible change expenses, both at Hillside and at the Farragut High School complex, and what I don't remember exactly is what the total, I mean, we basically, what they did was they put all the possible items in year 30 million?
30,
Okay, that was
37, 34.
It was a lot of money.
It was a lot of
I
money.
just remembered when I
Okay.
first saw it.
I mean, that was just.
But that was like
they
the,
worked
everything in the
through
kitchen
everything.
sink, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
they threw everything, I mean, there were 5 columns for 5 years, but they just threw everything in year 1 because the plan is to involve the larger committee that'll include some community members in helping to sort of figure out
Priorities, right?
priorities, what should go when, and whether some things go at all, because this included things from major repairs and replacements of existing things, such as doors or central air conditioning, to
Elevator shafts. Cracks around the
motors, things like that,
sidewalk.
to, completely doing a gut reno of the middle school auditorium and things like that. So there, so.
Everything that needed to be done and
Wish
kind of
list.
wish list.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think the goal of the committee that we put together, which is meeting for the first time Monday night, is to really establish priorities. Like, what are the things that we want to see happen? And there are certain things that are kind of non-negotiables, that, the peak, some of the brickwork that they talked about on the end.
The pointing.
The
kind
pointing,
of.
sorry. not
Pointing,
peak.
right.
The roof.
And the last part of the roofing.
The roof, right.
Yeah,
Those
that
are
was
things
expensive. The roof was several $1 million, I think.
So those are things that we have to kind of do. Those are, so even just talking about those things structurally that we need in place. But yeah, I think you summarized it well.
Good, okay.
The other thing we talked about there, sorry, I think we talked about there, like a basketball night,
Yes,
right?
we did talk
But there
about
were a few
basketball.
things on the agenda, actually.
Oh, there was security, did we talk about
Security,
did.
which we
We
gave an
talked
update at the beginning, so I think we're okay
Right,
there. But we did talk about looking at opening the gym one night a week for like open gym night. Is there anything you want to add before I share what I know?
Not at all.
Okay, just from the conversation that we,
No.
Jody was on the phone. But we did talk about this, so it looks like we're going to be able to, after the break, start Friday night, 7:30 to 9:30, an open gym night for the community. That would be supervised by one of our people whose name I can't remember who it is, someone who's a coach or something, intramural. So we have money in the budget for that. and it would be Friday night, 7:30 to 9:30.
Different age group.
Different age
That's what I was
groups.
going to say, different age groups on different
structured?
days.
Is it structured in the sense of like, I guess like age?
Yes.
Or like
By
how is-
age,
But not necessarily structured like the person's going to ref a game. Like they're there.
Right, it's like pickup game.
Yes, right.
Okay.
And we will talk about, Jesse, we spoke this afternoon, we talked a little bit about the idea of how we manage it so it just doesn't become, it is open, but then a certain group of kids get there and they play the game and then the kids, like it almost, it's the same problem that exists. Right, half-court games, exactly.
Like to use every court, open them, so you have 4.
So-
And then possibly the green gym. So depending on how popular, they can increase
Right.
chaperone.
And
It's
so
not
we-
unlike years ago when there was,
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
YAP program that was run by the...
They talked about YAP.
Well, we had it when you went to high school here,
right?
They did.
They did.
And just so you know,
It was
technically,
a
we're
program
actually
ran by the community center, like
called
on
YAP, yeah.
Friday
I
nights
thought it
or
was a joke.
something.
But, you know, YAP is not a joke. But just so you know, we technically probably could have launched it this Friday. We just kind of wanted to work out some stuff. So next week, we're not here Friday, school's closed. So it'll start the Friday after the break. And again, it's like a little mini thing because then the weather's going to get good. So if kids want to play, there's obviously the outdoor, courts by the field or what have you. So, but we'll see if it works. Then next year we know to, built in for it.
The other thing that I think we talked about, without going into a lot of detail, is needing to take a look at the fields and our field usage.
Yeah. Oh yes, we did talk about
You
that at the
did?
meeting.
Oh, I wish I had known.
I
Okay.
know. Well, what had happened was that, so the outside groups were ASO, and I think we discussed it. Now we have, now that our fields are back online, well, and finished, they had come back.
ASO had
they
a
submitted
request for a lot of field time.
Our concern right now is our fields, unfortunately, were pushed back from our original completion date. So the type of usage that they requested would be, it was like 6 days a week, every field, like 6 hours a day. And right now, we're pulling our own teams off of the field. So we were,
Yep. And we don't have the use to that Zion. What is it? The field Zion?
No,
Xenon. I don't know.
Zinzers.
Zinzer. Sorry.
So,
Headlights,
I'm sorry.
Judaism, whatever.
So we're just
Z,
right now at the
oh,
beginning.
sorry. Oh,
We
yes.
are what we're going to do is release some of the fields and see, we're going to use them as an experiment to see how they hold up. And I think we're talking about either practices and then, like, as the season goes on, like
Right.
releasing them potentially for a game here and there. So it actually was they were very receptive to it.
Also, we have some additional teams right now this
Yes.
season,
Yes.
more than we expected.
More modified teams and.
And I think to Jesse actually did a really good job just explaining that part of it is that we have not been through a full year on the fields, and we really don't know how they are responding, coming back.
Right.
And all that. So once we have a better idea of using 1 or 2 fields and see how they respond, that'll give us a better idea of like what is their usage versus ours. So, I mean, I have to say that the two gentlemen who came from ASO were very nice and
Good.
and were
And receptive.
Is it like financially really attractive, or just trying to be community?
We don't make any.
No, we don't.
No, we're not getting money.
It's
ASOS
not
for totally
financial,
free.
it's about making our
Community.
fields a community.
And I was just trying to figure out all the variables.
But we had
But
talked.
there's a financial aspect if we have to.
If we have to maintain our field, right? But we did talk about the fact that when the bond went up or what have you, that the board took a position that they would try not to change affected communities' use of the facilities moving forward. But because our ability to use them was compromised because of this other field that we didn't have access to, and our increase in modified teams, the conditions were different than what they were, at the time of that conversation. So
Well, part of it too, we do have more fields, so actually the use that they would be requesting would be increased.
Increasing,
over
right.
what-
So-
But again, I think we had, it was actually just, a bunch of people, not a bunch, but internal people there, and I think they seemed.
Talk about not using them when they're wet.
Yes.
Not using them what, Eileen?
Not using the fields when they're wet. That's always been one of the problems with
Outside groups, or ASO.
The one thing I would say on that point, since, I missed this meeting, is that our neighboring district, Ardsley, is very aggressive about closing fields.
Much more than we've ever been.
At the hint of wet. And I
Yep.
think that
We have to be
they're an
more.
elementary school, I can't speak to the quality of their fields, but certainly AMS manages to hold up, I think, reasonably well. So we have to be on that of.
Yeah.
I
mean, that's a big element. On top of
Well,
that.
they had said that, I guess, the last few years that.
We didn't used to
have
do
an
that very
official
well at
way,
all.
They were telling their coaches, once Ardsley put that sign on, they
Oh,
were
if
kind of
Ardsley's,
pulling.
oh, okay. Pull Hastings
Like
when
ASO
Ardsley
people
pulls.
were actually using that as their model, like if it's too wet in Ardsley, we.
Probably too wet in Hastings.
I mean, that's what they
Yeah.
were relaying to the coaches.
Yeah, and I think is Greenberg still around, Rivertown?
Yeah, I didn't realize actually that Irvington isn't in the Rivertown.
Well, Irvington's not NASO.
Yeah,
Right, they're
Irvington's
not
in
in-
ASO.
No.
Irvington's not NASO?
But I think
No,
what-
it's Dobbs and Ardsley.
Dobbs, Ardsley, and Hastings.
Doug, the issue
Rivertown's
is
United,
that,
I
you know,
believe.
because the kids are from Dobbs, Ardsley, and Hastings, you know,
We all have to share that,
Right.
you know.
ASO sort of applies to all of those school districts to get field space,
Right.
and
That makes sense, yeah. No, they do. I never knew what the finances behind it were.
But I did,
Now I do.
say to them, did you think that if we weren't able to give them the request that they put in, is that going to put them in a really bad position? But I think that they felt that they were able to manage it. Like, they do want to get back on our fields, but I think because Dobbs Ferry put in the additional turf field there, you know, I think that, I wouldn't want it to be like, oh, now we can't have, you know, like a certain amount of teams, because there was a commitment from each school district to give a certain amount. So, you know, I think we left it kind of with them, like, we want to give you more field space, but.
So what did we leave it, next year?
Like,
or-
well, we're giving them some field space for
Oh,
the
okay.
spring, like 2 practice fields, but, and then as the season progresses, if we felt it was okay here and there to say, okay, you know, this coming weekend, potentially we can give you rentals for if you need to have a game or two, something kind of like that, as opposed to like what they were requesting, so.
Okay.
They get it, that's it.
Okay. So we did find the Finance Committee report, special education report?
Oh, that's me. So,
Thank you.
we met right on, I'm just
Friday the
pulling up the
9th.
minutes, yeah. Officially, I will be the minutes keeper moving on. Basically, what we tried to figure out was, since it's a new committee, you know, who's on the committee, what its goals would be. So Laura Sullivan will be listed as the facilitator. I'll be the minutes keeper. SEPTA representatives will be invited and involved. There's also going to be PTSA representatives potentially on the committee as well. Tony's on the committee. Lisa's on the committee, and Tesfa's on the committee. Okay. So we started talking about what our goals should be. So we talked about the idea that the committee can look at the audit and the progress and sort of, I don't want to say monitor, but take a look at it, see what the feedback is from the community, bring it to the table, and we can discuss. We also talked about the possibility of including teaching staff or other administrators who could sort of rotate in as the discussion could potentially involve them, or an upcoming topic that we know we're going to discuss might be relevant to them. Obviously, they're welcome to join at any time. Let's see what else. We talked about that. The new director of curriculum of learning and instruction will also be a required member once he or she is hired. So the first part of our meeting had to do with talking about mental health and how it is an issue in a district, and mental health, as well as a number of the other areas that we talked about. While it can potentially fall under special education, I think one of the parts of the conversation that I think is so important for us to discuss as a board, realize as a board, and also communicate with the community as well, is that when we're talking about mental health issues, it's not necessarily simply kids with IEPs. While there are students who may be classified with ED or have other mental health issues that would require classification, there are many children in the district who have different levels of mental health needs. Laura Sullivan spoke to this at one of our previous Board of Education meetings when we just looked at the number of students, or she put the number of students who went to the nurse's office in a given month, and they were not related to any sort of physical
sickness, illness, but it was anxiety, stress, depression, and that ranged from the gamut of, sort of butterflies in the stomach to sort of more really serious issues. So part of the discussion was how can we support students with IEPs in terms of mental health issues, but how can we also sort of expand that? What are the roles of, a social worker versus a guidance counselor versus a psychologist? A guidance counselor is there for really all students, general education students as well. We talked about how if we could look potentially and research other schools in Westchester, because there are schools in Westchester that have programs that really help students with mental health issues. For example, I think it was the PTSA who had recommended something like a rap room.
Yes.
Right? And it was a place where kids could go. Don't know exactly how this would impact budget and staffing and all of that, but the idea is a place where kids could go in order to decompress. And there would be somebody there on staff in order to sort of help them work through whatever is going on.
And if I may add just to that point, Christina, the following week, it just so happened that we had oh, sorry, no, I'm lying. That day, we had a meeting. I had a meeting with PTSA leadership, and they did share, just so the board knows, that if there was a financial component to potentially facilitating a wrap room and a place for decompression, a place to talk about things that are kind of on kids' minds or whatever, that the PTSA was also willing to support financially if that was a need. And so I'm not quite sure what that would look like as a Schedule B position, whether it's open during lunch, I don't know, during time, different times. But we had an interesting conversation around that, and also just around some of the mental health issues being connected to some of the stuff that actually Kayla and Simi touched upon. There are dynamics within our school community, every school community, but certainly we're most concerned about ours, and where there are social sort of structures that exist in kids in one group or another group. And so even this wrap room being a space that doesn't matter where you fit in the the sociogram, but you have a space to go. Even if you don't sit at the senior lounge, you want to go, that kind of thing. And so it's about access and opportunity. And we see. So
yeah.
that did come up.
And I think it was really important that one of the big sort of takeaways was that mental health issues, it's not a special ed issue, right. It's a kid issue. And the more we can sort of embrace that notion, I think the more we can support our students. Currently, yes, there are going to be students who are going to be sent out of district because maybe their needs can't be met right. in district if they do have an IEP, but we even discuss ways that we could potentially create programming. Yeah. Other districts are doing it around Westchester, in which there's almost like we talked about this, there's almost like a home base for students who really have emotional issues, and that becomes their home base. Yeah. And then as they feel supported, and as they feel that they have that ability to go to English class or go to math or whatever, they can go to that class and then come back.
Right. Yeah, someone to touch in.
So there's lots of different programs out there, and it's definitely, it's something to consider. There's also a discussion on the continuum update about the resource room that's going to be brought into potentially the elementary school, and also ICT algebra class for 8th grade, which is also a possibility.
We actually do have the spot for it. The team just doesn't know if there's actually a need for it. Like, they will know once
right.
they do the testing or whatever they have to do, but we do have the staffing to facilitate an 8th grade ICT algebra class if we need it next year.
Yeah, so. And then there was discussion regarding the reading specialist, mm-hmm. and I know that was mentioned earlier tonight. I think in part that's where some of the discussion began. It began in this, I don't want to overstate.
No. That's the truth.
But it really began there. I think it's extraordinarily important for the board and the community to know that there are 2 reading specialists in Hillside, and currently they do not service a single student with an IEP who has a documented reading disability. Now, I don't think that anybody who attended this committee thought that for a moment that the 2 reading specialists weren't doing a good job and that their services weren't needed for Tier 2 and Tier 3 RTI students. Everybody in this meeting said, absolutely. You have Tier 2, Tier 3 kids who are need additional supports than a teacher can provide. Yes, a literacy specialist, a reading specialist is absolutely needed. But what is continually coming up, not just this year, but in previous years, and is illuminated, quite illuminated in the audit, is that special education students who have documented reading disabilities are not being given instruction by a reading specialist. And that's not to say that the special education teachers who have certifications, which is very different.
Training.
They have training in maybe a program or 2 programs. That's completely different than doing your entire master's in reading, literacy, decoding, all of the different programs out there. And that is a huge gap. By all means, I would say yes, reading specialists for RTI, Tier 2 and Tier 3. But to not service the kids who need it the most is criminal. And I think the audit brings that up. The audit also discusses at length the need for a literacy specialist, a reading teacher, at the secondary level. There is not a single one in middle school or high school. I don't know what the history has been in terms of requests that have made in the past, whether requests have been made, whether there was money in the budget, not in the budget, but it's unheard of. We talked about this earlier. It is unheard of to not have a reading teacher in a secondary level. You still have children, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, who are learning to decode. And for those parents out there who have general education students and your children are able to do it, God bless. You know what? God bless, because it's when you have a child who's older and cannot decode and is 2 grade levels or 3 grade levels or 4 grade levels behind, how is that child able to access any curriculum? So I would also say that the special education audit, the title of it is completely misleading. The title indicates that this is a special education problem and that the responsibility falls on special education. It does not. Part of it does, but a major part of this report that I've read 65 pages more times than I keep going back to it and going back to it. A large portion of this has to do with general education services and building level services and supports that are given, training that is needed for special education teachers. And that falls directly on the buildings. Hillside, middle school, high school. It's not popular to say it, but I'm saying it. And the kids who are now in middle school and high school, they are the kids who have been missing out on this literacy instruction for years. So if we don't do our due diligence, if we don't put in a literacy specialist, and I would argue we need 2 literacy specialists. We need one in the middle school and we need one in the high school. That's what I think. It's not popular, but I'm going to say it. I don't see how we as a district in good conscience could have children graduate without the basic skills they need in life to read, to function. You talk about college ready, we're now starting to talk about life ready. These kids aren't life ready. They're not going to be. And if that means that until the balanced literacy, until the RTI, all of the great things that are being done at the elementary school level, that's being done. But it's the kids in K, 1, and 2, possibly 3, but I don't know so much. Those are the kids that are going to benefit from all of the programs that are being put in. But the kids in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, those are the kids who are not receiving the services. They're not the beneficiaries of all of this good stuff. So if that means that as a district, we need to add additional funds or money in order to support those students until the programming catches up, well, then that's what we have to do. So I don't know. I know everybody has their own passion. Clearly, this is my passion. But I would argue that having a child graduate from here without the skills to have a job, to balance a checkbook, to read a contract, is tragic. And that not only has implications, not only reflects on our school, it has implications on our society. So if we're going to do the right thing for this community, for our society, we need to step up. And the audit itself, and, you know, okay, we could talk about literacy. We could keep going into that audit. Everybody has to own it. It can't just be Laura and Tesfa and Tony. It can't just be SEPTA and PTSA. It has to be all of us. It has to be the general education community. It has to be the general education teachers. And it has to be all administrators. So I went off a little bit on a tangent. But yeah, that's what happens. We also took a look at the timeline of the audit. And I think that's an area of concern as well, because what is our legal obligation in terms of fulfilling the recommendations of Dr. Katzman? As a Board of Education, we agreed to adopt all of the recommendations, and June is around the corner. So part of the discussion was about, well, are these things that have to be implemented? Are these things that have to be checked off the box as being done? Or are these things, as someone very astutely noted, we have to demonstrate that sort of in the spirit of, that there is an attempt to address these issues. And I think that Lisa has reached out to Stephanie, and we're still waiting to hear back. But sitting in the Board of Ed special education meeting, I encourage you to attend, because the desperation of parents who attend is palpable. They look at the 65-page audit, and they look at it, and they go over it, and they said, you know what? We brought our kids back to district because of this audit. We kept our kids in district because of this audit. Some things are being done, some things are not. And at the end of the day, we are stewards of this audit. So I think that's something that we all, as trustees, really need to think about. This is our legacy. I think we all have to be able to look in the mirror and decide what we want our legacy to be. And that's all I have to say.
I have a question about, we've got the lawsuit, we've got the assessment, the audit, we've got the report, we've got a game plan to address some of the audit, and there's some things are being missing there. Yeah, you know more clearly than I do. And I think and I think this is directed to you, Tony, as well, is, I mean, I think when we think about driving change, there's a financial aspect to it, there's a cultural aspect to it, there's just a lot of different, there's the hard numbers, which is easy to throw dollars at something, and then there's the softer stuff. And, to listen to you, to also listen to Laura when she was presenting and asking for, it was a little, there was so much data in Laura's presentation, it was hard for me to really, I got more from you right there, from the directness. I mean, she had to cover a lot more information. But I guess the question that I would ask with regards to this, and I don't think we have to go into and talk about it now, is, as a board, what can we do? What are we not doing? What are the things, are there requests that aren't being made? Are there cultural challenges? And again, we don't have to go into it now. This is probably another, 30-minute conversation. We don't have to go into it. But to the degree that there are gaps, what are they? Are we identifying them? Are we putting a game plan together to cover them? And when we're not, what's going on and what's happening? Because it's hard for someone who's not in special ed and not seeing it on a day-to-day basis to actually understand. There's the pretty, thing that gets shared, and then there's we're doing A, B, and C, and then there's the really what's happening in A, B, and C, and quite frankly, it's very hard to assess that. So,
I understand.
And so, and I get, there's not a director of curriculum in place yet, and that's going to help solve some stuff, and, you were trying to, build a plane while it's flying, but...
We are certainly trying to build a plane while it's flying, and that often does not end well. But that's not something that we're going to...
But I guess more just the timeline and game plan.
No, I think, I thank you, Christina, for the update that you shared. I think, if anything, what would probably be super helpful is to just take the word special off of the audit and just call it an education audit, because I do think it speaks to, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, finance. I think our families who are in the room can say that we've had these conversations as well throughout the year. I think we are drilling, well, I could say that internally we are trying to push the conversation deeper than just what is a special education thing. There are components in the audit that are very specific to special ed, certainly, whether that's to gaps in performance, whether that's to overclassification rates. Those are really specific things. But when you look at it from that 30,000-foot lens, you take the balcony view, it's about how we teach and how we learn. It's about how we learn and instruct. And so, I mean, even the fact that, we just recently got into a conversation about how reading specialists are used and who provides what interventions and why, and what the logic is behind that, what the thinking is behind that. And I can tell you, again, we literally just had a conversation last week, and not just because of this issue that came up. It was a meeting that was scheduled for a bit. Those are conversations that I think are necessary, and now are finally happening. But you do uncover, you lift a rock and you see, oh, shucks, there's this going on under here. And so we are, I think, trying to prioritize where the needs are, but looking at it from that broad general ed lens, not just special ed. And Laura and Tesfa have been working tirelessly.
Yeah, they're amazing, I have to say.
And there is
really
a lot
doing
there.
A great job.
And I thank you for saying that. I think they are, and and I spend a lot of time with them. Certainly not doing their work, but a lot of the stuff that is special ed specific in there is a lot. Like it's dense. The broader their general education stuff is about vision. It's about culture. It's about philosophy, and those are difficult conversations to have, because there's a lot of personal investment in culture, in philosophy, and I think if I could simply sort of verbalize it, it's deconstructing some of the silos that exist at each building level, and I think that's been a product of different things, changes in leadership, changes in curricular leadership, and how that manifests itself. So just to look at what vertical and horizontal articulation looks like, and that's not to discredit the amazing work that's happening in our schools at all, by any stretch of the imagination. It's impressive to see everything that's going on, but it's like thinking about how do we go from great to greater, or it's that kind of thing. And so the opportunities are really quite exciting to think about, yet they are also daunting. They're huge. And so how do we parcel it out so that we know that we're getting to stuff in a meaningful and deep way. And we're not just doing a little bit of, we're not doing whack-a-mole, and it's like a little bit of that and a little bit of that. We want to make sure that we're getting to it. So those conversations, to your point, are happening. They are at the beginning stages, but I do think that audit speaks to who we are as a district, which is great because it gives us a lot of things to work on. I mean, not great that we have those things, but it's great because we have stuff to work off of. But I will say that I'm very hopeful based on the conversations that we've had, based on the partnerships I feel like we're establishing with our parent leadership, but even more broadly, and looking at our building leaders who are taking active roles in this work, and Laura and Tesfa really pushing that, broadening the lens, so it is not just a Laura and Tesfa thing. But just that in and of itself, right? So just to wrap up the conversation just about reading support and who gets reading support, and you touched on it, Christina, that they only provide RTI, whatever. That was like a 2.5-hour conversation, and it was just the tip of the iceberg. Like, it was literally that we listed everyone that's there, what programs they use, what the training has been, and what issues exist. And so to unpack that, which, by the way, would be a very powerful place to start because literacy skills bleed into every other skill that we think about when we think about life readiness. I'm hopeful about that.
And I'll throw out there, we're looking for a director of curriculum.
Yes.
If change management is not one of the top priorities of that person, it's a waste of a hire, because that is the primary thing. They have to know about curriculum. That's like a ticket to the dance. But that is not going to be helpful to us because there's too much complexity with this stuff. There are too many personalities involved, and the reality is a good plan is going to get us nowhere. It has to be unbelievably good at executing in a very complex environment. And that, it's going to be you and that person together hooking arms, because to the degree that Laura's focused on special ed stuff, she can't solve the gen ed issues that are going on. So I don't know, I'll just throw out there that look, I do change management all day. I mean, just listening to this conversation actually just drives me a little crazy because I know there are solutions to this, but someone's got to be on it. It's got to be owned. And it's not an easy thing to drive these things forward. It's like a day-to-day thing. I'm not criticizing you.
No, you can criticize.
I'm just merely saying, like, this is like, this is big stuff. It's hard.
It is big.
It's very hard.
It is big stuff. And even if a director of curriculum instruction, and what is it, administration or whatever, is hired tomorrow, it's going to take that person 6 months to get up to speed. So while I absolutely agree that a director of curriculum instruction is needed and will be a vital person in playing a role here, we don't have 6 months to wait. To be like, all right, let's sit back and we'll wait for the director of curriculum instruction. When they come in, well, we'll figure this out. And until then, we'll just kind of like collect data and we'll figure out who's got certification and what. No, when the rubber hits the road, this is about a federal lawsuit. That this lawsuit was building for years, and now this is what, 3 years after the lawsuit? We're talking about years.
But are we clear on those things within 6 to 8 months that need to get done, that can't get done without a director? I mean, is it, because I'm actually just want to be really clear here, because I'm feeling a lot of highly frustrated energy from you, Christina, and it's warranted. I get it. Yeah. I understand it. And we're in a spot where we have the resources we have the people we have, and are we clear on what needs to get done? So if there's an 8-month gap between when we hire someone, we hire this rock star who still comes online and can't, whatever, that's like, right? But, how do we get to a place where we feel comfortable that we're driving this thing in the best way that we can with the resources we got? I mean, it's the old expression, you can't go to war with the army you want, you got to go to war with the army you got. And this is the army we got. We're here right now. We got to do what we have to do, and we hope it's going to get better. But I'm just like, I guess, what I'm feeling from you is you're painting a picture of a gap that seems uncrossable, and yet we got who we got. And like, what do we do now? Is that plan, do you feel, in place, or?
No, I don't.
Okay, so that's another conversation.
I'll be honest with you, and my experiences might be different than other people's experience, but not only do I not feel it, but the people that I speak to within the special education community, many of them are not feeling it. It's certainly not all. obviously, there's going to be a range, there's going to be a spectrum of people who have different experiences and whatnot, but I do feel that there is a contingent that specifically when it comes to reading, when it comes to math, when it comes to the gap between where children are supposed to be in terms of grade level and where they actually are, that gap is not closing. And in some instances, and I can say in my own son's instance, it's widening.
Right.
So if you want to put a personal face on it, there you go.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we're going to solve that specific issue.
No,
here,
I'm not saying,
I think.
but if you're looking for data, that's it.
I mean, I would love to just offline, I don't think we're going to solve it here, just sit down and just from a change management plan, I would love to just maybe help somehow figure out how we get from here to there. Because I think we're all pretty clear on what a there looks like.
But the roadmap, part of the roadmap for that is in the audit.
All right, okay.
And that's what everybody, I'm not saying that this is the holy grail and our solution, but everybody needs to read the audit. Everybody needs to take accountability for their part in it. And then everybody needs to come together and figure out how they are going to work towards those goals and recommendations that are made. Is every single recommendation like a recommendation that has to be put through? Maybe at the end of the day not, but there are things in here that systemically have been going on in Hastings for a decade. Yeah. And so if you are hearing frustration, it's not directed at you, it's not directed at anybody specifically. It's frustration because these are real people with children who are struggling. And there are families that are making really hard decisions right now. There are families that are spending money on getting their kids extra services after school because the reading instruction or the math instruction isn't sufficient. There are parents that are leveraging everything that they've got to get additional evaluations and additional therapies. This is, it's a game changer for families. You want to talk about culture? Talk about the culture within a family when this dynamic is going on and what it does to it. Every family has their issue to bear. Special ed families are no different or no special, but right now that's what we're talking about, and right now that's one of the issues that's on the table, and it's been on the table. So, it's something that
look, I hear
everybody
you.
has to own.
Yeah, so I mean, when the idea of everyone has to own, that is change management, and that is the highly complex part. And I think I don't want to take up any more time here talking about it, but I would love to.
I think we do have to move on. But Christina, what I appreciate from what you've said, not just the end, is in this committee meeting there were so many different things that you covered. And so many important areas, and I think that's really a huge step
Thank
forward.
you. Just one final thing is, I really think that this district needs to consider what it's doing moving forward. Otherwise, I'm concerned about us legally.
Yeah.
I'm just putting that out there. I am very concerned. This is my board of, I mean, obviously I'm sitting here at the table. Obviously, anybody who's watching this is like, okay, there's the parent in her, there's the board. I mean, I get it. And probably before when I made a comment about curriculum, there's the teacher hat Christina's wearing. So yeah, I wear many hats. But my Board of Ed hat says this: we're opening ourselves up to liability.
A lot there. I hear your frustration, and I agree. I'm not even. I honestly want to have a different conversation just offline with you a little bit and figure out a chat with you, Tony, and just. It's been around for obviously a long time. It's a big issue, but thank you for spearheading the committee because it sounds like you guys have done.
I would like to say that while passionate and I'm just speaking my truth. It might not be everybody's truth, but it's the truth that I witness from my friends, to my community, to the children who are in the classes with my children.
So more to come there, for sure. I'm going to keep moving forward with the audit committee. We met this week?
No.
Last week?
Last week.
No, today's Monday. We definitely did not meet this week.
We did not meet this week.
And we just kicked off the audit process, which is a whole bunch of documents that Maureen has to pull together.
Planning meeting.
We're required to have a planning meeting.
Auditors, and they go over the components of the audit and kind of what they're.
And give you a list of stuff that you have to collect.
We were able to kind of go through some of like the timelines, and then we reviewed the controller's audits and the recommendations, like just to make sure. We touched on some of the previous audits as well. This was part of the meeting, and then we talked about the need to schedule our internal audit and some topics that may be
Focal areas that we want, yeah.
And I think one of
We talked about the
One you
stack.
guys said today, right?
The stack bucket, I don't know if we did.
well, that, but I think what has kind of changed. And
Oh,
what
the cyber.
I was thinking the cyber, because interestingly, in our meeting today, we're required to have something like that, Tony.
Yeah.
After you and I spoke, when I came back down here, Tony, remember that was part of the conversation, that we're required to have a privacy and security aspect of what we do. And
That's part of our tech plan.
the facilitator had mentioned that a lot of districts are having cyber audits done to make sure that they're in compliance for this new part of the tech planning that the state is requiring, because they're putting for obvious reasons, a very high importance on the fact that we're doing a good job in privacy and data collection, and it's a big focal point of the state. So after hearing that, we're going to have to do it. So we may be able to use we can use our internal auditors for that function, unless you wanted to use them for something else. Because we have to pay that regardless, because we have to have one.
But is there anything that's a higher priority now?
You know, we've done internal audits on probably 7 or 8 topics in the last, since they sort of put in that requirement. So I think we're actually, I think this one is really timely.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me there's also been a sort of sea change in the way that data is being used in social media, and the liabilities, and that there have been hacks on schools and things like that. So this one may be just a very timely one to do that, yeah.
Yeah, I think before they made this, make sure, did you change your password every 30 days? Now it's it's a different look at it. I think they're looking, I know when I've seen presentations, they talk about the different hacking, the phishing. I mean, it's a much more.
And this was brought up, Susan Barossi brought it up last year, who's our external auditor.
Right, that we should be doing it.
No, I mean, she talked a little about because we use BOCES for a lot of our data, sort of warehousing and collection of things, the firm that they use on the other end, and the certificate that they need to give us and things like that. So we talked about it a bunch last year, but I think making it an official, hiring somebody to do it like that, and having them really do the audit would be,
Because they do it as part of a small piece of their year-end work. They'll like test some components of it.
Yeah.
And I think what we were finding, I think was reported out, to Eileen's point, because there's so many different software vendors we even use, and we're doing it through BOCES, and we're like relying on them to make sure that there's a reliance, kind of a very heavily reliance on them.
Yeah.
And this gives, when we have an audit done, they actually go to BOCES and check out all of those things on our behalf.
We've had like a one-page assurance.
Hume goes there, and this is one of their strengths, doing this type of
Well,
audit?
they would
or?
send somebody in that area, so they wouldn't, the person who, there's 1 or 2 people who may do, if it's like purchasing, they'll send an individual, but they actually have, the woman's name's Kathy, and that person in her team, when she does a risk assessment, she would come and do it, and actually they have a person who does more like the back end. There's different people who do different things. It may be somebody who's like looking at your server security, like it's definitely like multiple people.
When do we have to tell them what the focal
he has to,
area?
I have to call him, because he should be in shortly, because every year we have to have a risk assessment as well, which is like a week's worth of work that they interview like 20 people on staff, and especially when there's changes, like maybe with Tony, they'll just to kind of make sure that nothing has changed in the way we do things, and then They give us a risk assessment update, and then in that, unless, like, say, during his risk assessment, he found something that was concerning, then that may change your focus area.
Yeah, but they should be able to come back with the risk assessment by May.
Correct.
Because you have to decide by June what you're
Right,
going
where
to
you
do.
focus.
And then, because that information then gets picked up when the external auditors come in, and they come in August. So all of this has to happen in the next 4 months.
And they test the internal auditors'
Right.
reporting.
They check out,
Okay. Rise and Diesel meeting, Tony?
Sure, we met last Thursday, or Wednesday morning, and we talked about the district's efforts around recruiting a more diverse candidate pool, people from underrepresented groups. So we shared an update with the team around that work that we were doing, which we have talked about here. So I don't know that we need to review that here. And then the group that was there broke up into smaller groups and looked at a draft of the protocol as it exists that was generated by a committee facilitated by Tesfa and Jesse. And they offered feedback based on how they read the protocol and areas that we could build in moving forward. And I had a meeting today with Jesse and Tesfa to give them that feedback so that they can then go back to their committee, bring them together, and address some of those needs. So that's...
And I was at the meeting. I think one of the interesting things we talked about was, as opposed to having just a generic protocol for race issues that come up or diversity issues, to actually take use cases of actual incidents that might happen and see how that would go through code of conduct, and what does the code of conduct cover, and DASA, and what does that cover, and where are there gaps, and so that it's not just a theoretical protocol, it's actually built around actual
and that's what they're going to be doing.
And that's the work they're doing now.
They're going to go through case studies, yep. So.
Okay.
Not right now. No, we're just focusing on finalizing the protocol.
Okay, policies. The policy second read, we've got a couple policies up for second read.
Yeah, the policies that are up for second read were policies where the first read was in December, and somehow or other we didn't do the second read yet. But I did not hear anything back from anyone since the first read in December, and both the changes on these two policies were pretty minor. They were just minor clarifications regarding the confidentiality of discussions held in executive session that affected both of those policies. So unless anyone has any questions, we could...
There are just a couple of typos that I saw, but I can send those to you. Just like him should be his. And
Oh, well, send them directly to Janine at this point, because she'll pass them into NISBA once we adopt. So, so if no one, other than with the correction of the typos that Eileen has found, if no one's got anything else, then we could adopt those.
So do I have a motion to adopt these policies under second read? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. And we've got a policy first read, quite a few.
Yes, so the first read, there are a whole bunch of them, and as I mentioned at the last board meeting, there were 3 of these that we'd like to sort of expedite all the way through to passage because they relate to a law that was passed in the state and where we're supposed to have these things in place relating to graduation requirements. So the ones where we'd like to take them straight through and vote on them tonight would be 4770 graduation requirements, 4772 graduation ceremonies, and 4773 diploma and credential options. 4770 and 73 are basically sort of just referencing back to the one on graduation ceremonies, 4772, but basically the regulation that went into effect the end of February requires that any student who's earned either a skills and achievement commencement credential or a career development and occupational studies commencement credential, but has not met the requirements to earn a high school diploma, is still able to participate in the graduation ceremonies. And since by state law, we really are supposed to have adopted this policy as of February 27th. The policy committee was recommending that we fast track it, and if no one on the board has any issues, that we get those passed tonight. So does anyone have any issues? No.
So do I have a motion to pass 4770, 4772, 4773?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
And then the others that we don't, we can sort of take our usual amount of time with are the ones that are left on, I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth between my minutes and the, oh, thank you. Yeah, the 6,700 purchasing, the 9,700 professional development, the 4321.12 use of timeout rooms, which that one would actually be a new policy that we didn't have, and the 6240 district investments. All of these are changes that are being recommended to us by NYSBA based either on clarifications from the law or just based on decisions that have come down from the state. Given the hour, I've got everything outlined in the minutes from our meeting, explaining what NYSBA's suggesting and why. The drafts of the policies I've got redlined so that you can see what language is new and what stuff I've crossed out from our earlier versions. So rather than take more time now, so those are just kind of out there for the first read, and at our next meeting in April, we could pass them. So if people do have questions after reading through them and reading through the comments from NYSBA as to why the changes are being made, you can just email me and I can hopefully fill you in.
Thank you, Donna. Okay, next is the school calendar. Tony, do you want to walk us through that? Or?
Sure, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have the attachment, or yeah, there you go. So it is, thank you, Doug. There is a school calendar that's being proposed. We've gone through several iterations of a school calendar. We vetted it by different stakeholders to kind of get a sense. I also spoke to other districts to find out what people are doing. And so the calendar that we are proposing is the one that was attached. But to highlight specific things that would be of relevance to our community, we would start before Labor Day with staff to do superintendent's conference days. The school would start with for our children on Tuesday after Labor Day, and then we would have typical break in the winter month around December, standard break in February, and then in spring break in April. We are...
Spring break in April is over, is that Easter Sunday?
It is starting, I don't know when Easter Sunday, it starts the 12th of, Friday the 12th would be our last day of school. Actually, I think Easter is the 21st, so we would have
the
off.
Monday's off after.
We have off Easter Monday. We have a total, we are proposing a total of 186 days for staff and 182 days for students. We are proposing 4 superintendent's conference days, 2 in August, 1 in November, and 1 in March. March is a bit of a long month, so we're looking to break that month up for folks. And those are the major things. The one thing that we did talk about recently that's not on here, but we don't need to adopt right now. So you're just being asked to adopt this calendar as it stands. One of the things that we've talked about informally is the idea of if we do not use all our snow days next year, conversation about having like up to 2 days as a give back to basically close like vacation, extend a vacation. But that's not something we have to decide today because it's not in the language of this current draft.
What's the number of days for students and
So we have
teachers that
186 for...
No, that we have to have?
We must have 176 for kids to meet our mandates.
Okay.
The 180 days that you hear about includes 4 superintendent's conference days. So, yeah.
And so this calendar has...
182 days for kids.
182 for kids.
And 186 for staff, which means we have 6 snow days built in.
In this current year?
We...
Days for kids, days for staff?
So we have 1 more snow day built in where we would still meet our number for the kids.
Which was 182?
Oh, yeah, I think it was the same numbers. I don't have that in front of me, I apologize.
So Tony, this calendar has something that I don't ever remember having, which is a Saturday morning graduation.
Oh, yes, thank you for observing that, for noticing that. I was going to say that at one point, and school...
And prior to the end of school.
Right, because school next year, as the state has mandated, is going till June 26th. That is...
What part of is that as a mandate?
So Regents. Yeah, the Regents rating day is the 26th, so you have to go to school until that day. Which is crazy. But very aligned to like the city.
So the 25th and 26th could not be the 2 extra days off if we don't use them.
Well, actually, I mean, we could do whatever we want with those 2 days. We don't have a mandate
Could be for kids.
They could be, yeah.
Oh, for kids.
Yeah. So we would look at that.
Kind of a
Yeah.
waste of days anyway.
Right. So it would be for everyone. It would not just be for kids. Well, we would have to figure that out exactly what part of the Regents rating would have to be us physically in place here staff-wise.
Okay.
But we would have some flexibility in that. If we were to agree to that give-back thing, we'd have to revise the calendar and explicitly list what those 2 days would be, so people know in advance. But Jody, to your point, to your question.
And right now, sorry, just for the snow day, you don't use them, you lose them.
Yeah, right, if you don't lose, right.
You don't lose them, you get more education.
Well, this is true.
This is, I'm with you there.
Yeah.
100%.
But,
I say that tongue in cheek.
well, we use them. We use every moment of them. But we do have one, just to be clear, because there's stormy weather coming, we do have one day we're okay. But Jody, your question about graduation?
This is the last nor'easter.
This is the last nor'easter, according to Mike. Whatever. But that discussion about when the graduation was going to take place, Lou vetted by PTSA, and he brought it up at a PTSA leadership
I'm not challenging it, I'm noting it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's of note.
Yeah, it's a totally different plan than ever been used before, but because the way it falls into a Wednesday, when I guess the leadership team at the high school looked at different iterations, this is the one they felt was one they wanted to try. So, we'll see how it goes for Saturday morning. And then we have a rain date, I think, for Sunday, if Saturday, I don't know, whatever.
Tony, the only question I have on
Yes,
this
please.
is, the
Go.
5th versus the 6th, you have a half day, then a whole day off?
Yeah.
Could you make it a whole day off on the 5th, and then the 6th, and flip the 5th?
That's going to switch. That's not staying there. The HTA did bring that up. It's this half day. It will change in the next
You have a
version.
3-day weekend for families.
It's gonna probably be the 1st of November, actually. The reason we didn't switch is because they didn't give me that information in time, but we said we could switch that, so that will change. So it's not a half day right before. Sorry. Yes. Thank you for catching that as well. Yeah.
Tony,
Yes. Go ahead.
as longtime board members know, I always have my 2 cents on the calendar.
Donna's the calendar maven.
It's exciting. I didn't know that. I would have brought you in to develop it. I would have leveraged you for help.
And at first, I was actually amazed that with both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur being weekdays, that you were actually able to do something like make a 4-day weekend over Memorial Day, until I realized what Jody was saying, that because we're actually going sort of 3 days into the last week of June, that was why everything fit like that. The only, other than what Eileen was talking about with the half day and the whole day, but it sounds like you're dealing with that, we had talked earlier this year about the fact that in the past, early dismissals were actually at 1 o'clock or not at 11:45 or 11:55, and that the only one that we really did like that was, I think it was the emergency dismissal drill, and that the difference between ending at 11:45 versus 1, that it doesn't quite qualify as a school day. So how come I thought we were going to go back to what we used to do and do the 1
So
o'clock.
this is what we have learned. Well, it's not finalized from the state, but but other districts are going off the same assumption that the state is going to change the requirements about number of minutes, which is why that came up. So the number of minutes as they are structured this year is you need to have 25 hours a week for elementary and like 27 and a half hours a week or something like that for secondary. Next year, they're letting you have a lump sum of minutes. So in the school year, they're proposing that we have 990, I believe, for elementary, and I can't remember the number right now off the top of my head for secondary, but that lump number is then yours to make sure you're meeting however your days are structured.
Okay.
So we will have more flexibility, which is why the change in the dismissal time on half-days.
Okay. The other thing that I might suggest, going back to one of my other pet calendar peeves, about the fact that with working parents, it's frequently easier to schedule parent-teacher conferences in the morning and then go to work late than something smack in the middle of the day. And one of the problems with doing that was always that we would lose another day, because if, like, doing it the way it is here, you know, you've got the 2 half-days, which each one could count as a day, whereas if you made all the parent-teacher conferences on one day so that you had morning and afternoon, since the kids were out the whole day, you'd lose a day. Given that we have this luxurious calendar where we're making a 4-day weekend out of Memorial Day, maybe this would be a year where you could float the idea, instead of just having a normal 3-day weekend for Memorial Day and putting all the parent-teacher conferences on one day so that the kids were just off the whole day, but that parents actually could have an 8 o'clock or a 9 o'clock meeting in the morning and still get to work after that. I know when we talked about it last year, the calendar was so much tighter that, you know, there wasn't a way to lose a whole day that you could do that. But this calendar, it seems like there potentially is. So that would be the only other thing I'd nitpick.
You can nitpick away at the luxurious
I'm done.
calendar.
I'm done.
But no, what I will say is that the only thing I'd have to check, well, one thing we'd have to check with that, and that is a way that some districts do it. They close for the entire day. Is just what the contractual implications are with the HTA, just because there is language around, I don't know, but I'm not sure if it's about half-days or not. So we'd have to look at that to make sure that we're in, you know, compliance, or that they're comfortable with a modified version of that.
It just also, from a parent's point of view, seems a little bit simpler to have one day that you're just trying to deal with childcare for the day, rather than having 2 early dismissal days that you're scrambling for childcare. So it just feels a little bit more family-friendly to me, but that's my...
And I will say that we, you know, definitely have gotten feedback from, especially our working families, that is, you know, a concern, a fair point. So we can definitely look at that. We would have to make some modifications to the calendar anyway before the end of the school year, so we can.
So do you think that we should vote on this tonight, and then if we want to make accommodations?
I will tell you why I would ask that, I would ask that we vote on it tonight, because there are certain structural things that we want to make sure are in place, that we're having superintendent's conference day before Labor Day, that we keep the, you know, graduation where it is. There are certain things that are not going to change, even if we play with that kind of stuff. And the breaks, we feel like, are not going to shift based on what we know. So my recommendation would be to approve it, and then to approve a modified one, which would also likely include the next time we put something on, like board meetings and stuff like that, would also go on that. So we'd have to adopt it again. All right?
Does everyone feel comfortable with that? Yeah, okay. Motion to approve the 18-19 calendar? And a second? All in favor?
I'm going to abstain until I see the changes.
Okay.
It's a little feisty.
Go, girl.
5 and 1. Okay. Second public comment. Does the public want to comment?
Hi, Mia Johnson. I live at 127 Fairmont. I am standing here as a parent of a child with a disability and also as a SEPTA co-president, and wanted to express my sincere gratitude at the words that Christina Mitchell spoke tonight. I think she speaks, as she said, wearing many hats. She speaks for many families in this district. I don't want that to, I don't want there to be any mistake about that. Her passion and conviction is really tremendous, and this board is very lucky to have her. I wish I was half as eloquent as she is. As I'm stumbling here, I was feverishly taking notes about what I wanted to say. I wanted to, so as my sort of rambling thoughts, I wanted to acknowledge that there has been a lot of good work this year, that Tony's been working. We have a great relationship, Tony, and we've been meeting regularly with both Tony and Laura Sullivan and Tesfa Stewart, but there is definitely more work to be done. There is more conversations, more discussions, and the work has to happen now. I feel like I say this every few months. These families and children don't have the luxury of time. You speak to high school parents and they'll say, well, it's great that these changes are happening, but what about my kid? My kid is leaving the district. And you talk to middle school parents and they say, well, that's great, things are happening at Hillside, but what about my kid? And my kid's 2 years behind where she should be in reading. You have kids at Hillside that are going to be at the middle school in a year or two, and they're terrified that their child isn't going to have the reading skills that they need in order to succeed. So I would just implore you again, this is the time to be asking the thoughtful questions and to be probing. And I was grateful, Doug, for your comment. I think it's great that you want to talk to Christina offline, but why can't we talk about it here? Or why aren't there more venues, more engagement from the board? Because families are looking to you for your leadership, and the board will be held accountable. And I just wanted to say that and to publicly thank Christina for her words earlier tonight, because they struck me at my core, and I can honestly say she speaks for many families. I guess the other point I would make is that when the district is serving its students in special education, all students throughout the district benefit. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Sorry, it's rambling. It's late. I apologize. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. I figure it's 10:30. We're all here. Might as well say something. I'm Kate Lowengart. I live at 9 Amherst Drive. I just wanted, so I'm the VP for Hillside on the SEPTA board. And I'm really going to wear that hat when I talk tonight, so I don't digress into my stories, because we all love our stories. But I think it's really important for you all to understand. So Hillside, a lot of great things have been happening, and we have this great confluence of events. We have a new principal that's been very open to changes. We have a new superintendent who has an incredibly open door to us. Probably more Fee would have a very different opinion about that, but it is a very open door. We've had incredible dialogues. And there's so much opening and air happening around this topic, particularly in the younger grades. But that said, I think it's good for you to understand our insights, being the people who are the first line that parents come to. So parents think, my kid's not reading quite right, and they reach out to a friend, and a friend tells them, you should really talk to my friend who's on SEPTA. And we have really, in one aspect, we're the advocates for all of these families, but we're also on the ground talking to families day to day. What we don't hear anymore is that people are feeling discouraged from CPSE and CSE meetings. We hear that they're leaving feeling supported, that they were heard at the table, that there's a collaborative approach. And I also can put on, I'm a nursery school teacher at a local nursery school in town, and what we have seen coming back from our children in Hastings, which it used to be like a nail biter, and you knew this kid needed something, and everyone's coming back in the building with smiles because they felt like they were heard and the children are getting what they need. So these are great things, and these are things that are actually completely under the control of Laura Sullivan and Tesfa Stewart, and they've been able to turn that around so quickly. I mean, by day one of this school year, all these meetings have been different. I can speak, personally from my own meetings, it is a completely different conversation. And that is wonderful news. The other thing so we're not hearing any of that anymore. We're not even hearing about how do I refer my child, because once people start talking to their teachers now feel comfortable giving them that information. And the principal is calling them to talk to them about it. The thing that we are hearing the most from parents, and it is exponentially grown, and I'm talking like double-digit conversations, is how do I pull my child out of the district? So on one level, we have these things that are happening that are so great, right? Like all these things are working to get children into the system, to make families understand the system. But then you have these families who are feeling like their children are getting lost between the great things happening and the things that didn't happen for their kids. And from my perspective, and I think that might be a nuance that's lost on people who aren't immersed in this, is that we're talking about the achievement gap here. We're talking about the majority of children in the school district who are in special ed who have learning, are diagnosed with, either have LD or the IOH, OHI, yes. I always flip the letters, which is the irony of standing here with a dyslexic child. That's a different story. So we're talking about the majority of kids who can function in a regular classroom, in a general ed classroom with supports. And we don't have the ability to keep them on grade level. And so what's happening is they're moving into the ICT. They're moving into the learning lab. We're going to break the learning lab. There's some great things happening. They're going to help these kids. But none of the conversation is ever about shrinking their performance gap. And as we know from the audit, our gap is wider than like districts and the state standard. So that's where this conversation needs to be, because special ed can handle special ed. That's not the problem. And I think Christina so eloquently explained that it's the gen ed, special ed silo that needs to come together, because that's where things are going to change. Like, that's the conversation that we're having with the PTSA about the literacy specialists. And now the literacy specialists are going to be shared. And that means somebody who's working on the gen ed curriculum is now going to also work with a special ed kid in that same grade, and they're going to understand where that kid needs to be. I think whenever I, as a parent, ask this question of how do we shrink the gap, it's my kid, well, your kid's making progress. My kid has had the same gap since before she had an IEP. There's never been a shrink in that gap, and every other parent I talk to has the same issue. I'm sure, Mia, you probably speak to this too, but we're not hearing from parents, well, my kid's gap is shrinking. Kids' gaps are either staying the same or they're growing. And I think that that's where you all need to be. Doug, thank you for asking questions tonight, because I can see that, and your expertise is exactly where this is. This is about change management. What can you all do sitting at this table if you're not on the special ed committee? Ask questions. When a teacher comes here with a new training program they're doing, ask them how it's being worked into special ed. Ask Jesse Merchant how he's working with students who are athletes who maybe need the directions repeated to them a couple times. Ask, when people are coming to you to talk about all the great things that are happening in the school district, you need to show them that that combination of special ed and gen ed working together is a priority at this table, and that will help shift culture tomorrow. You all have the power to do that, and the people who are inside the school right now are working so hard to make that happen. But to Doug's point, this is about getting somebody who can really focus on this change management, and that's going to take time. The families who are coming to us asking how they can pull their kids from district, they don't have any time left, because their kid is in 4th grade or 3rd grade, and they saw that change was coming. They saw the audit was on the table. They thought, great, I can keep my kid here and have them be successful, because we're going to make a commitment to this. The school's going to move forward. And meanwhile, their child was in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, and they're not getting the skills they need, and time is running out. They see that window closing, and they either need to make a decision to pull their kid or to keep them here and maybe inhibit their success for life. Like, literally. If you don't learn how to read by the time you're in 8th grade, there are major impacts. Kids who have delayed literacy have major impacts in the rest of their lives. And so these parents are literally making decisions about their children's lives. like Christina said. And so I just really encourage all of you, we are here to share our experiences, both in terms of our own personal experiences, because unfortunately, we've had to become experts in these topics. We can't do anything about that. Like, I have to be an expert in everything that I have in my life, in my house. And I have to read books, and I have to speak to people, and so we have like this panel of experts that can share our information with you. We can talk to you about what it looks like on the ground. If you need more understanding or feel confident to ask these decisions, please know that we're a resource for you. I mean, and you have one of the best resources in town on the subject on the board. So Christina is here, and please hear her, because there's so much passion there, and I think that she speaks for multitudes of people. So we're so grateful about the progress that's been made, but I do think it's important that you all understand where your role is in order to help really move this forward and really focus on the achievement gap, because it's also that's not a checkbox on the audit, and that's the hardest piece about this. You know, we can add a resource room, we can add all the things that are in the budget are all must-haves. We know this from the audit. The achievement gap is everything. And so it permeates every single thing that is going to come to this podium and to this board. And it's important that you're always looking with those eyes. And if you need help focusing, we're here. So thank you so much, and let's keep talking, because I think that's very important at this juncture. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, anyone on the Board of Ed have comments? Anyone? Going once? Going twice? Great. Well, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you.